Chapter 4240. Didn't you just video call him a few days ago? Hua Jin said again. Daddy is so busy, he might not have time to come back. Why don't you call him and ask when he will come back? Natalia's eyes were wide open, and she looked expectant. Hua Jin didn't want to disappoint her, so he walked to the side and took out his phone. He looked at Gong Jie's FaceTime, hesitated for a moment, and finally dialed. Hurricane Group. Gong Jie put on a windbreaker and walked into the maintenance hall. He looked at the huge monster parked on the tarmac. An armed helicopter. This was his personal vehicle. Armed helicopters were equipped with weapons and developed for the purpose of carrying out combat missions. They were divided into ordinary armed helicopters, stealth helicopters, and high-speed armed helicopters. Armed helicopters could be divided into two major categories: special purpose and multi-purpose. The special purpose type had a narrow fuselage and stronger combat capability. The multi-purpose type could be used to carry out attack missions as well as transport, landing, and other missions. Modern armed helicopters not only carried a variety of weapons, but also carried a large amount of ammunition. In terms of single aircraft, helicopters with a higher takeoff weight could carry more ammunition. For example, the Mi-24 armed helicopter used in the Eaton P-2H war and the AFH war. The nose is equipped with one 4-barreled machine gun, 1,500 rounds of ammunition. 4 anti-tank missiles can be hung on the short wingtips, and 4 hangars can be hung under the short wing 4 57mm rocket launchers with a total of 128 rockets. If rockets weren't installed, 1,500 kilograms of bombs could be installed. Another example was the AHL armed helicopter used in the Vietnam battlefield. It was equipped with a 20mm cannon or 30mm cannon in the nose. 8 anti-tank missiles or 76 70mm rockets could be installed under the short wings of the fuselage. The A-129 helicopter with a takeoff weight of less than 4 t was equipped with an organic gun. Could carry 8 Hort missiles or 52 70mm rockets. The air combat type could carry 8 Mistral air-to-air missiles. For an organized armed helicopter unit, its firepower couldn't be underestimated. At this moment, this huge armed monster was undergoing daily maintenance. Men were creatures with a strong desire to conquer. Therefore, they liked cars, tanks, and guns. Not everyone could own such a huge armed monster. This military helicopter was a gift from Gong Xiaoying when he came of age. So far, it had been in service for 10 years. If the results of this maintenance were not good, he would probably have to retire. Gong Jie could not bear to part with her. After 10 years, it was impossible to say that he had no feelings for this comrade. This was the most precious gift he had received when he was 18 years old. For so many years, he had treated it like a treasure. However, now that he was about to retire, he could only lament that time had passed too quickly. This big monster was the H-1 Cobra armed helicopter. After the end of the Vietnam War in 1990, the United States Marine Corps decided to use the AH-1W Super Cobra as a base to upgrade their armed helicopters in all aspects, and the result was the AH-1Z Viper. The first prototype of the H-1Z was successfully tested in 2000. Nominally, this was an improvement in the Super Cobra's performance. Within its lifespan, just the cost of maintenance and training alone would be hundreds of millions of USD, or even more than 1 billion USD. Chapter 4241. Hurricane was especially strict when it came to the maintenance of equipment. Gong Jie walked up to the helicopter and gently stroked it with his hand. He gave it a name, Robin. He gave it this name because Gong Jie used to have an idol when he was young. His favorite was Batman, the main character of Marvel's comics. When he was young, he liked to collect Batman memorabilia. And Robin was Batman's partner and assistant. He was also known as Boy Wonder, and together with Batman, they were known as the energetic duo. When he was young, he also hoped to have a close friend and assistant like Robin. Until Gong Xiaoying gave him this military helicopter. For some reason, the first name that came to his mind was Robin. That day, he sat in the brand new pilot's seat for the first time. Touching the controls, he felt as though the H-1Z had been given life. Your name is Robin. What do you think? He actually gave this big guy a name just like that, talking to himself. For 10 years, Robin had carried him through the skies. It had also flown over the aurora and the horizon. In the rain of bullets, it had been his most loyal partner. It had helped him shoot down missiles that tried to sneak up on him. Its hard shell had helped him block countless bullets from machine guns. It had also been on the brink of death and had gone through life and death together. Young Master Jie. He walked over during the maintenance, holding a thick stack of test reports in his hands. Gong Jie walked over and asked anxiously, "How is it?" "The test reports are out. Robin has met all the requirements and can continue to serve in the military." Upon hearing this, Gong Jie's eyes lit up. He turned around and jumped onto the big guy happily. It was just like when he had just become an adult and saw it for the first time like a child. "Robin, that's great." He thought that Robin couldn't continue to serve in the military. He didn't expect that Robin could continue to accompany him by his side. Just then, his cell phone suddenly rang. Gong Jie answered the call. Soon, Hua Jin's face appeared clearly on the screen. At the same time, Hua Jin also saw Gong Jie's face on the screen. For some reason, Hua Jin saw a smile on Gong Jie's face. It was rare for him to see him smiling so happily. Usually, he had a cold face and an indifferent expression on his face. It was rare to see him smile so innocently like a child. Upon seeing Hua Jin, the smile on Gong Jie's face disappeared and he cleared his throat awkwardly. What's the matter?" Hua Jin was speechless. Could it be that his face dampened her mood? For some reason, Hua Jin was a little, "Are you free?" Gong Jie thought about it for a while. He did not seem to have much free time recently. His schedule was packed. "What's wrong? What's the matter?" "Natalia misses you," he kept asking me. "When are you coming back?" "Give her the phone." "Okay." Hua Jin passed the cell phone to Natalia. Natalia held the cell phone and saw Gong Jie's face. She immediately smiled. "Daddy, are you busy?" She looked at him eagerly. Although she was smiling, the anticipation in her eyes made Gong Jie unable to say that he was busy. "Daddy, do you miss me?" Natalia asked again. Gong Jie raised his eyebrows and leaned closer to the screen. "What do you think?" Chapter 42:42. How do you know that I don't miss you? If you miss me, you will definitely rush back to see me. Natalia pouted, looking aggrieved. When Gong Jie heard this, he couldn't bear to see her like this. He ran his fingers lightly across the screen as if he wanted to touch her face. "Daddy will go back to spend some time with you. Okay?" Natalia was still not satisfied with this answer. She asked, "When will you be back?" In a few days." "Then, in a few days." Gong Jie frowned slightly. He didn't know what to do next, so he couldn't give her an answer immediately. However, if he gave her a half-hearted answer and didn't call her back after agreeing on a time, Natalia would be very disappointed in him and think that he didn't keep his word. Therefore, he had to be very careful when answering this question. Thus, Gong Jie replied, "Daddy will call you back tomorrow. Okay? Daddy will arrange some work and go back to see you when I have time. If Daddy is really busy, you don't have to come back to see me." Natalia was a little embarrassed. She could tell that Gong Jie was really busy. Although she missed him, she couldn't force him. Natalia was very sensible, well-behaved, and considerate. She didn't like to force people. Seeing this, Gong Jie's heart softened even more. "Good girl. I promised to make time to go back to see you, so I will definitely do it. However, I don't know what to do next. Why don't you pass the phone to Uncle? I will tell him something." Okay?" Natalia reluctantly passed the phone to Hua Jin. Hua Jin took the phone and walked to the side. Before Gong Jie could speak, he lowered his voice and said to him, "Did Alice tell you?" "What did she say?" "It's about Natalia." "Natalia?" During this time, Alice hadn't contacted him. Who was Natalia? Noticing the confusion in his eyes, Hua Jin realized that Gong Jie probably didn't know about this. Alice suspects that Natalia's personality has already appeared. However, Alice said that Natalia's personality is very dangerous. She even knows how to hypnotize people. Therefore, Natalia is in danger. Danger? I might as well say that she is a dangerous person to us. She is like a ticking time bomb. We don't know when she will explode, but we don't know if she will explode. Gong Jie frowned and said immediately, Alice didn't mention this to me. I think she is too suspicious. Hua Jin paused for a moment and said, I've been under a lot of pressure recently. It's not that I'm scared, but I'm worried that I won't be able to take good care of Natalia. After all, I have no experience in taking care of patients, and my reaction is always half a beat slower. Don't worry. There's no need to be so stressed. Just pay more attention to her condition. I believe that with Alice around, the situation won't get out of control. I will arrange my work as soon as possible and try to return to China as soon as possible. Because Alice was by Natalia's side, Gong Jie wasn't very worried at first. However, when he heard Hua Jin's words, he realized that things might not be so simple. Chapter 42-43. Hua Jin nodded. For some reason, when Gong Jie promised that he would arrange it as soon as possible and return to see Natalia, Hua Jin felt inexplicably relieved. The name Gong Jie seemed to signify an absolute sense of security and reliability. Hua Jin put away his phone and walked in front of Natalia. Under her expectant gaze, he smiled and said, Daddy will arrange for work as soon as possible and return to accompany you, Are you happy? Natalia was so happy that she stepped on the waves. Uncle Hua Jin. I feel so lucky to have met Daddy and you. Natalia didn't know why, but she felt extremely emotional. She suddenly jumped off the swing, ran in front of him, and gave him a big hug. I love you. Perhaps it was because she grew up in the West, but Natalia knew how to express love. Hua Jin was stunned. He didn't expect Natalia to give him such a warm hug. It seemed to be the first time she hugged him so actively. He was overjoyed. He also squatted down and hugged her tightly. I love you too. Yeah. Natalia blinked and suddenly thought of something. She lowered her voice and asked softly, Then, if I make a mistake, will you and Daddy not want me anymore? How can that be? Hua Jin didn't think much of it. Who doesn't make mistakes? No one is a saint and will never make mistakes. How can we abandon you just because you make a mistake? Natalia's eyes couldn't help but turn red when she heard that. Hua Jin suddenly realized why she asked that. She had lived in an environment with too many uncertain factors since she was young. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that she was homeless. Strictly speaking, Natalia didn't have any real family. At first, when Gong Jie said that he wanted to adopt her, she didn't think much of it. She had a feeling that this family wouldn't last for long. She didn't have much confidence in the concept of home and happiness. Therefore, she felt uneasy and cautious. She even deliberately distanced herself from him because she was afraid that once she put her feelings into it, she would be sad once they were separated. Then it's a promise. Natalia carefully extended her pinky. Her eyes sparkled as she moved closer to Hua Jin and pouted. Pinky promise. From now on, we're a family. No matter what, let's never be separated. Okay? After spending so much time together, Natalia realized how warm it was to have a family, even though they had been living together peacefully. It was this long-lasting warmth that made Natalia even more dependent on Hua Jin. The more he felt warmth, the more he felt that this warmth was precious and the more he wanted to cherish it. Especially today, after the phone call with Gong Jie and learning of her needs, he immediately arranged for work and flew back to accompany her. It made her feel like she was being treasured. Therefore, she also wanted to cherish it and open her heart to let Hua Jin and Gong Jie live in her heart. Hua Jin reached out his pinky and gently hooked it with hers. His lips curled into a smile, revealing his pearly white teeth. I promise you. Natalia looked at him and smiled. Chapter 42-44. She was grateful to Hua Jin and Gong Jie for giving her such a family, even though such a family seemed to be different from other children's families. Everyone else had a mother and a father. It was a pity that her family didn't seem to be such a combination. Natalia leaned into his embrace and suddenly asked curiously, If I call him Daddy, what should I call you? Uncle. Hua Jin raised his eyebrows. Isn't that what you've always called me? But I want a mommy too. As Natalia said that, she suddenly smiled mischievously. She sized up Hua Jin and said sweetly, How about I call you mommy? No. Hua Jin said awkwardly. I'm a man. How can I call a man mommy? That's how you address a woman. But you're prettier than most women. Natalia blinked, but her expression was sincere. Hua Jin was speechless. That he couldn't deny it. He was indeed prettier than most women. But that's not a reason for you to call me mommy. Haha. Natalia didn't care. She kept calling him mommy. Hua Jin corrected her, but it didn't work. Finally, under Natalia's coaxing and pestering, he nodded. You're not allowed to call me that outside. Then what should I call you? Hua Jin was also confused. That's right. Hua Jin suddenly said, how about you call me daddy too? After a pause, he felt a little guilty. Are you willing to call me that? I'm willing. But, what if you're both here? Natalia didn't say it clearly, but Hua Jin understood what she meant. She meant that if Hua Jin and Gong Jie were both present, wouldn't it be easy to confuse them if they both called him daddy? How about this? Natalia said, I'll call Gong Jie Daddy Jie, and you Daddy Jin. Hua Jin suddenly laughed. It sounded as if he and Gong Jie were a couple. It felt weird. In foreign countries, many gays and lesbians formed marriage families, and their adopted children were called that. If outsiders heard it, they would misunderstand that he and Gong Jie were a couple. Daddy Jin. Daddy Jin. It sounds nice when you call me that. After spending so much time together, she was no longer as cold and distant as she was when they had first met. This question stumped Natalia. She mumbled, I like both of them. Hua Jin asked again, if he and I both fell into the sea, who would you save first? Natalia furrowed her brows. I don't know how to swim. If I save you, I'll die too. Ha ha ha. Hua Jin was amused by her serious answer. What I mean is, if you know how to swim, then I'll definitely save you first. Why? Because Daddy Jie knows how to swim. Natalia looked troubled. Chapter 42-45. I'll tell you a secret, okay? Natalia said seriously. What secret? Actually, I have an older sister. Natalia hesitated for a long time before deciding to tell him the secret. Hua Jin's expression changed instantly. Sure, this is a secret. Don't tell anyone else, or else my sister will be angry. What's your sister's name? Natalia, Natalia said. Actually, it feels weird to say that she's my sister because other than me, no one else has seen her. I feel that she's more like another me. You can see her? Probably. Hua Jin was a little confused by her tone. Why did she sound so uncertain? So, can I see her or not? Does it count if I see her in my dreams? In your dreams? I feel that she can control my body. Do you know about the crystal ball? Hua Jin vaguely sensed that he might be able to find some clues about Natalia from Natalia's mouth. Hence, he listened to her attentively. That crystal ball was a gift from my sister, Natalia. Gift? Natalia nestled in his arms and recalled. Actually, the first time I saw her was a long time ago. At that time, I couldn't sleep well. I would have many dreams, very strange dreams. Many times, I couldn't even tell which was reality and which was a dream. So, she gave me that crystal ball and said that as long as I hugged it to sleep at night, I would be able to sleep well. At least I wouldn't have those strange dreams anymore. Crystal ball? Could it be? Natalia had hinted to Natalia that hugging the crystal ball would allow her to sleep well. Was she actually using the crystal ball to control Natalia? Natalia might have been controlled by Natalia because of the crystal ball? This seemed to be a very important clue. I see. Hua Jin probed. Do you have to hug the crystal ball to sleep every night? Yes, sometimes I forget, but if I do, I'll have a lot of strange dreams at night. However, if I hold the crystal ball, sometimes I feel like I have slept for several days, and I feel very tired when I wake up. I see. Actually, I'm very curious. Natalia frowned and turned to look at Hua Jin. Pursing her lips, she hesitated for a long time before finally asking the question that had been bothering her for a long time. None of you can see Natalia, can you? Hua Jin didn't say anything. He just shook his head subconsciously. I feel that Natalia is very bad. Very bad. Yes. She told me not to trust anyone, including you and Daddy. So, in the beginning I was always wary of you, but slowly, I found that you were very good to me, very gentle, just like family. I wanted to get close to you, but every time I wanted to get close to you, she would stop me. How strange. She always seems to be able to see through my heart. Then why do you think she's bad? Because... Chapter 42-46. Natalia is like a demon living in my heart. For some reason, this sentence sent a chill down Hua Jin's spine. Did she really say that? In the study, Alice was playing with a fountain pen. Hua Jin sat across from her, deep in thought. Outside the window, it was already late at night. Natalia had already fallen asleep. When Alice returned home, Hua Jin told her everything, no matter how big or small, about what had happened. Alice was surprised to hear it. Wait a minute. My mind is a bit messed up. Alice frowned. She decided to connect the clues and reorganize her thoughts. Hua Jin sat quietly on the side. He did not say anything, afraid that he would interrupt her thoughts. Can I understand it this way? Alice said seriously. Natalia controlled Natalia through the crystal ball. She could even decide when she could control this body and when she could let Natalia control this body. I think so too. But then what is Natalia's purpose? Alice could not figure it out when Hua Jin mentioned it. She had been thinking about Natalia's purpose and motive, but she could not figure it out. Hua Jin opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but he did not dare to do so. Alice obviously sensed that he had something to say, so she encouraged him. What do you think? I think my idea might be a bit ridiculous. I'm afraid that you will laugh at me if I say it out loud. Even if it's authoritative science, there are many ridiculous possibilities. In real life, there are too many ridiculous things. Why don't you tell me about it? Maybe it's an important idea. Don't you think that it's suspicious that Professor Romanka allowed us to adopt Natalia so easily? Alice was suddenly stunned when she heard that. A white light flashed across her mind. What do you mean? Since Professor Romanka created Natalia, does he have the ability to control this personality? Perhaps, in terms of relationship, Natalia regards him as her father or perhaps as her master. Alice frowned and her eyes suddenly flashed with a sharp light. That's the main point. Then, since there is such a possibility, can Natalia's motive be considered as Romanka's? That he was the one who ordered Natalia to do all this? It's not impossible. Alice rubbed her temples. Hua Jin's words had undoubtedly opened up her mind. Then, encouraged, Hua Jin finally voiced his doubts bravely. What's Professor Romanka's motive for creating Natarisa? You should know better than I do. Before this, I've looked into his academic research and spent some effort, but I also learned that Professor Romanka has always wanted to create a personality society to achieve the goal of controlling people with multiple personalities. Alice pondered for a moment and suddenly said, Professor Romanka's so-called personality society is to create a personality to take on the role of the Reaper. Reaper? Alice said in a low voice. Yes. This Reaper has the status of a leader recognized by all the personalities, and has enough authority to control the life and death of all the personalities. Chapter 42-47. How is that possible? Hua Jin, on the other hand, was in disbelief. Don't tell me that even the main personality of a Reaper can be completely controlled? It's not to the extent of being controlled. However, it's hard to completely rule out this possibility. That's equivalent to not saying anything. Hua Jin said again. It's like a doctor telling a cancer patient. There's a chance of curing the disease, but it doesn't rule out the possibility of not being able to survive. I've already said that even the most authoritative science doesn't have absolute conclusions. In fact, there are still many things in this world that humans haven't explored and understood. The so-called science itself is a known and verified answer. Alice emphasized and said, however, what we've learned from Professor Romanka's conclusion is that the Reaper's ruling power is very terrifying. Hua Jin suddenly became a little worried. can't be that the main personality can be killed, right? After a pause, Hua Jin said again, I remember someone said before that the position of the main personality is absolutely not allowed to be challenged. The main personality won't be controlled, let alone killed. Yes, that's it. Alice frowned and suddenly said, but that's only in theory. For example, after many experiments through electric shocks, and even through many similar experiments, there's a possibility that the other personalities will disappear. There's a more mysterious saying that these personalities are all driven to the land of exile. However, the world of dual personality and multiple personality is very complicated. After all, this kind of symptom is not like a fracture that can be determined through X-rays. It's very difficult for the outside world to find out what the world of these patients is like. You can't enter their mental world, so you can't find out what kind of earth-shaking changes are happening in their bodies. Then, you mean, Professor Romanka and I came up with the idea that the sanctioner couldn't kill the first personality, but in the illusion, the first personality was killed by the sanctioner in the dream. What if the sanctioner knew that he was already dead? The death of self-awareness is like a person in a vegetative state. He thinks he's awake, but he's actually still alive. He's just in a deep sleep, but he doesn't have the consciousness to wake up. Perhaps such a deep sleep is not far from death. Hua Jin was confused, but he finally understood what she meant. It was nothing more than, for example, if the Reaper split from Natalia's body, then in the dream or in the illusion, the Reaper killed the first personality. Then, if the first personality thinks that he's dead and doesn't realize that he's only dead in the dream, then an endless deep sleep is no different from death. Do you know? Alice said seriously, if Gong Fan doesn't take the initiative to release Yu in his consciousness, perhaps, Yu would still be trapped in the endless seal. Hua Jin could not help sucking in a breath of cold air. Chapter 42-48. Then, let me ask you a question. Hua Jin asked seriously, can both Yu and Gong Fan's personalities be preserved at the same time? Alice was stunned when she heard this. Why do you ask? You said that with Yu's current body, bearing two personalities is a huge burden. His mental strength can't support it at all. However, whether it's Shirshir, Xiaoichen, or even Yueyao, they all have feelings for Gong Fan. Under such circumstances, if Gong Fan's personality is erased, it won't be a good ending for anyone. Alice frowned helplessly. This is indeed a tricky matter. However, I've already contacted other experts in this field some time ago. When the time comes, we'll discuss it together. After all, I'm alone. With my ability, there might be many limitations. However, if everyone thinks of a way together, we won't be completely helpless. Okay. Hua Jin stood up and said to Alice, I'll go check on Natalia and see if she's asleep. Okay. Hua Jin went to Natalia's room. At that moment, the wall lamp in the room was still switched off. Natalia was very afraid of the dark. Sometimes, when she couldn't fall asleep, she would sleep with the lights on. Usually, Hua Jin would come to her room to check on her before going to bed. If the lights were still on, he would turn them off. Gradually, Hua Jin realized that she didn't like to turn off the lights. Every day before going to bed, he would come to check on her. This had also become his habit. As he walked into the room, he was surrounded by warmth. Hua Jin walked to the bed and sat by it for a while. He didn't know why, but when he looked down at Natalia's sleeping face, he unconsciously fell into a trance. Natalia slept very quietly. Her eyes were closed, and her eyelashes were long, thick, and slightly curled. Her fair skin was crystal clear, as if it could be broken by the slightest breeze. Before this, he didn't even think that he would like children so much. He couldn't even imagine what it would be like to get married and have a family. Before this, he didn't even like children very much. He always felt that children were noisy. If he didn't teach them well and raised a naughty child, it would be even more of a headache. Nowadays, there were too many naughty children. Some of them were brought up because their parents didn't discipline them well, while others were brought up because their parents didn't have the time. Hua Jin had been having a headache. This was because he had never had a good family since he was a child. He had been through a lot of hardships growing up, and it was not easy for him to become sensible. He was really worried that he would not be able to give his future children a happy family. This was because he did not have a happy family since he was young. Thus, he did not know what a healthy family was like. Due to an accident, he suddenly became a surrogate father and had a child. In the beginning, he had been caught off guard, but he had gradually gotten used to it. After that, he had completely treated Natalia as his own child, as if she was his own. It was also for this reason that he gradually understood Yoon Shirshir's feelings. Perhaps, when they grew up and became parents, they would understand their parents' good intentions. Because of this, he hated his father and mother even more. However, that was the grudges of the previous generation. He didn't want to understand, nor did he want to participate. He only wanted to give Natalia a warm family as much as possible. That was all. Chapter 42-49. He only hoped that Natalia could grow up peacefully like other children and have a normal family. Hua Jin gently reached out and carefully touched her skin. When his fingertips touched her face, he accidentally brushed past her eyelashes. Even though she was asleep, the itchy mark made Natalia shiver. He quickly retracted his hand, afraid that he would wake her up. After making sure that she was fast asleep again, he smiled, lowered his head, and gently pecked her on the forehead. Then, he got up, turned off the lights and quietly walked out. On the bed, Natalia felt as if she was dreaming and felt the warm goodnight kiss. She couldn't help but curl her lips into a half-smile. At night, Gong Fan lay in bed and couldn't fall asleep for a long time. He didn't know why, but he was a little anxious. He looked at the time and saw that it was already very late. He was also very tired, but he didn't dare to sleep. He was afraid that if he fell asleep, he wouldn't be able to wake up again. His anxiety made him even less sleepy. Thus, after a few rounds of tossing and turning, he felt much more refreshed. He sat up a little and leaned against the bed. He turned to look at Xiao Chen and saw that he was already breathing evenly. It was obvious that he was dreaming. Gong Fan let out a soft sigh and got out of bed. He shuffled his slippers and put on a jacket. When he passed by the study table, he saw Xiao Chen's earphones and iPod on the table and picked them up. He put on the earphones, walked to the balcony, and turned on the music. The music was paused halfway, so when he pressed the play button, the music started to play. Looking back, you haven't gone far, E's gaze will never change. Gong Fan was stunned. He didn't expect Xiao Chen to listen to such sad music. The music was alright, but the singing was sad and the lyrics were sad. It couldn't help but stir up one's emotions. Gong Fan walked to the swing and sat up gently. He casually kicked it, and the swing started to sway slowly. The night breeze was gentle, and it was a little cold. He straightened his clothes and looked up at the moon in the sky. Indistinctly, he heard a suppressed sobbing sound. Gong Fan was shocked and shouted. He followed the sobbing sound and groped his way over. His footsteps were very light, so even when he walked to the other balcony, the sobbing did not stop because he was discovered. What should I do? Am I being too selfish? When Gong Fan heard Yoon Shirshir's choked voice, his heart skipped a beat. He stood rooted to the ground, not daring to move. The balcony of the master bedroom was separated by a wall. On the balcony, Yoon Shirshir leaned against the railing. She lowered her head and held her forehead in frustration. Mu Yaja comforted her tenderly. Don't think too much. If Yu sees you like this, she will feel even worse. What should I do? Yoon Shirshir sobbed and said sadly, I can't bear to part with Gong Fan. My heart aches for this child. He has been carrying so much on his shoulders since he was young. Yu must have noticed my reluctance and heartache for Gong Fan. So he shouldered everything by himself, and I can't do anything to help. Because of my selfishness, even though he is in so much pain, he can't bear to make a choice. He is worried that if he loses Gong Fan, I will be sad. Chapter 42-50. She knew that she was the one who couldn't bear to part with Gong Fan. Yu could tell that she couldn't bear to part with him. That was why she had held on for so long. But now, she could tell that Yu's mental state was getting worse. Nightmares were endless. Nightmares destroyed one's willpower. Yu insisted that he was fine. She didn't even say a word of comfort. This wasn't something she wanted to see. She had imagined such a situation countless times. Yu and Gong Fan. She had to choose between them. But every time she thought of making a choice, she didn't dare to think about it anymore. It was this hesitation and indecisiveness that made you bear so much silently. There's no point in thinking so much now. I'm just thinking that whether it's Gong Fan or Yu, they are both our sons and we can't do without either of them. Maybe we don't have this condition now, but maybe in the future, in the near future, we will have this condition and you won't be in such a difficult position. When Yun Shirshir heard this, she couldn't bear it anymore. Even if the body can bear it, the mind will never be able to bear it, right? If it were you, would you be willing to share a body with the other personality? Wuxia didn't say anything. Of course, he wasn't willing. It wasn't because he was selfish. It was because both personalities would suffer because of this. No one wanted to fall asleep tonight, only to wake up half a month later. Even if it was the same person, two personalities would never be able to fit together 100%. No matter how advanced the medical technology is, there's no way to save you and Gong Fan, unless Gong Fan exists in another body. After a pause, Yun Shirshir calmed down a little. She gripped the railing tightly and said sadly, I don't want you to interfere with his decision because of me. You mean? Yun Shirshir was silent for a long time. With tears in her eyes, she looked up at the hazy moon in the sky, but when she thought of the decision she had to make next, she closed her eyes sadly and cried. Yu is an independent person. He should have his own thoughts and shouldn't be unable to make a decision because of my concerns. So, she choked on her sobs for a long time. The broken words in her mouth could not be strung together into a coherent sentence. It was obvious how much pain she was in. Her back was stiff like a rock. If I really have to make a decision. Yun Shirshir took a deep breath and said with difficulty, For Yu, I also want to give up Gong Fan. Even though the words were suppressed, they still reached Gong Fan's ears very clearly. He leaned against the wall and opened his eyes weakly. After a long while, he finally came to his senses and his eyes turned red. For Yu, I have to give up on Gong Fan. It was just a few words, but they were sharper than the tip of a knife. They pierced his heart mercilessly. Gong Fan pursed his lips tightly and didn't say a word. He stood silently in the shadows and hid himself. It was only when Wuxia comforted Yun Shirshir and helped her back to the room that he finally found his breath. He finally took a step forward, but he almost stumbled and fell to the ground. Chapter 42:51. He sat on the bed in a daze. At that moment, Xiao Chen was still sleeping soundly on the bed. He looked at Xiao Chen with sincere envy. He envied Xiao Chen for having a peaceful world. He didn't have to worry about not being able to appear again. He also didn't have to feel guilty, sad, or disappointed about being abandoned. Yes, Yun Shirshir's words were obvious enough. For Yu, she was willing to give him up. In other words, if there was a medical method that could save Yu, she was willing to give him up. Between Yu and his Libra, she chose Yu. But what was wrong with that? After all, her feelings for Yu were not something he could compare to. But it was unfair. It was unfair. In fact, he had appeared a long time ago in this body. It was just that Gong Fan felt indignant, but helpless. Even so, even if he knew it was unfair, what could he fight for? He couldn't win. Gong Fan suddenly felt very sad. The thing that he had been afraid of had finally happened. He had always felt uneasy and insecure. Even if Yun Shirshir tried her best to give him a sense of security, he still didn't feel safe. Now that he heard Yun Shirshir's decision with his own ears, Gong Fan's entire world collapsed. He lay down on the bed and looked at the ceiling in a daze. His tears gradually stopped, but that kind of sadness was not something that tears could express. His heart was full of tears, but they couldn't flow anymore. The next day, Xiao Chen realized that Gong Fan was depressed. He sat alone in a corner and ignored everyone who called him. It was just like when Gong Fan returned to the Mu family. He was cold and distant. No matter how patiently Yun Shirshir talked to him, he either turned around and walked away or pretended not to hear her. Yun Shirshir didn't know what had happened to make Gong Fan treat her so coldly. Xiao Chen was also very surprised. Why did Gong Fan's attitude toward his family suddenly become so cold? For the next few days, Gong Fan was like this. Xiao Chen could not hold it in any longer. He pulled Gong Fan into the room, and his cheeky smile was replaced by a serious expression. "What's wrong with you recently?" Gong Fan broke free from his restraints and glanced at him coldly. There was no emotion in his eyes. Since she had already given up on him, she might as well be cold to the end. If he treated them so coldly, they would also be disappointed in him and treat him coldly. In this way, if the day of separation really came, no matter who it was, they wouldn't be reluctant to leave and wouldn't feel sad. That was what he thought. However, his aloof attitude had undoubtedly infuriated little Ichen. "Why aren't you talking?" He was a little annoyed. "Didn't you say that no matter what happened, you would never make mommy angry or sad? But look at what you've been doing these past few days. No matter how much mommy and I talk to you, you ignore us. Do you know that mommy's imagination will run wild and she will be very sad?" This series of aggressive questioning made Gong Fan even angrier. He raised his eyes to look deeply at little Ichen and let out a sneer. Chapter 42:52. He was filled with anger, but he couldn't find a way to vent it. At this point, he still didn't want to make things clear. He didn't even want to vent his anger on Xiao Chen, so he forcefully restrained himself. Gong Fan took a deep breath and turned to leave the room. When Xiao Chen saw this, how could he allow him to leave without saying a word? Hence, he hurriedly reached out to grab him. "You haven't answered me." Gong Fan returned to his senses expressionlessly and asked disapprovingly, "Answer? What kind of answer do you want?" When Xiao Chen saw that his expression was still as cold as ice, he felt helpless. "What's wrong with you? I just regret it." "Regret? I shouldn't have come back in the first place, and I definitely shouldn't have let you wake up. That way, I could have occupied this body without any worries and wouldn't have to worry about competing with anyone." As he said this, Gong Fan angrily flung his hand away. He naturally thought that Xiao Chen would naturally be on the same side as Yun Shishir. He would probably choose to give up on him too. After all, compared to him, he would definitely prefer Yu. Xiao Chen was probably one of the people who had given up on him, just like Yun Shishir. As for him, he wasn't needed. What else was there to say to him? Gong Fan said resolutely, "What I regret the most is treating you as my family." After saying this, he ignored the petrified Gong Fan and left indifferently. Xiao Chen stood rooted to the ground for a long time, trembling in disbelief. He was angry that Gong Fan had let down his mommy's love. Mommy doted on him so much, but he had actually said such cruel words. Xiao Chen didn't know what Gong Fan had experienced. He didn't even know that Gong Fan had eavesdropped on the conversation between Yun Shishir and Mu Yaja yesterday. Hence, he only thought that Gong Fan had thoughts of betrayal. Was he planning to betray Yu and monopolize her body? Xiao Chen reacted and quickly chased after him. Before Gong Fan could go far, he rushed forward and grabbed his wrist. He shouted sternly, "You're not allowed to leave. Speak clearly." Gong Fan was also stunned. He had never seen such a furious Xiao Chen. He was like an enraged Tyrannosaurus, glaring at him like a tiger eyeing its prey. "I won't allow you to betray mommy and Yu. When Yun Shishir heard Xiao Chen's shout, she anxiously walked over with Yu Yao in her arms. However, when she saw the two of them confronting each other, her eyes widened in shock. "What happened?" she asked, completely unaware of what had happened between the two of them. Xiao Chen turned around. When he saw that it was Yun Shishir, he snapped out of his rage and regained some rationality. "Mommy, what happened?" Yun Shishir asked in surprise. "Why did the two of them quarrel?" Xiao Chen would never quarrel with Yu, much less with Gong Fan. From what he knew, Yu and Gong Fan were both his younger brothers, and he was the older brother. Hence, he thought that he had to give in to his two younger brothers and never quarrel with them. It was extremely rare for her to see Xiao Chen so angry, and she had never seen him so angry with anyone. What happened? Chapter 42:53. Hence, when she saw Xiao Chen flaring up at Gong Fan, she became even angrier and was determined to get to the bottom of the matter. However, in Gong Fan's eyes, this was undoubtedly charity. Xiao Chen turned his face away awkwardly and refused to say anything. He didn't want Mommy to be disappointed in Gong Fan. If Mommy heard those words, she would definitely be very sad. Xiao Chen was considerate and thus didn't want to say anything. Yun Shishir looked at Gong Fan again, but he turned his face away expressionlessly and looked coldly at the ground. Even though he was looking at the cold ground, he didn't want to look at her. What's wrong, Xiao Fan? Yun Shishir was a little confused. Looking at the two children turning their heads angrily without looking at each other, she didn't know what to do. Why was he treating her so coldly for no reason? Could it be that the children were more sensitive and realized that she had already made a decision in her heart? Mommy, don't talk to him anymore. Xiao Chen snorted and said, I don't like him. I still like Yu the most. Yu is obedient, and gentle. He will never make Mommy sad. What's wrong with him? Nothing. Xiao Chen still refused to say. Yun Shishir was anxious. The more he refused to say, the more she felt that the matter was serious. Gong Fan didn't say anything and turned to leave. Yun Shishir called out to him and walked in front of him. She held his shoulders and said uneasily, What's wrong with you? Why do I feel that you've been gloomy since early in the morning? As if you have a lot on your mind. What happened? Why don't you tell Mommy? Gong Fan finally looked at her. But at that moment, his eyes were filled with disappointment. He didn't know why, but he felt an inexplicable surge of emotions. He clenched his fists and held back his sobs. Pretending to be calm, he asked, If there comes a day when Mommy has to choose between you and me, I think Mommy must have made a choice. Yun Shishir was stunned when she heard that. She did not know why Gong Fan suddenly said that, but could it be that they had a telepathic reaction? Last night, because of her uneasiness and guilt, she couldn't get a good night's sleep. The next day, until Mu Yaja went to work, even though her eyes were closed, she wasn't in the mood to sleep. Uneasiness and guilt attacked her fiercely. She could even imagine how desperate this child who had wholeheartedly believed in her must have felt when she gave up on Gong Fan. When she thought of this, she felt as if her heart was being stabbed. However, even if she was reluctant, she had to make such a decision. However, for some unknown reason, why did Gong Fan also sense this matter? Yun Shishir's face was burning hot. At the side, Xiao Chen was also stunned. He did not understand the connection between the two events. However, thinking that Yun Shishir would not make such a cruel decision, he said stubbornly, Are you kidding me? Don't you know what kind of person Mommy is? Even if there's only a 1 in a million chance, she will do her best to protect you. Whether it's you or you, Mommy will not give up easily. Chapter 42-54. For a moment, she could not hide the guilt she felt towards Gong Fan. Her eyes turned red. Gong Fan looked at her red eyes. His heart, which he thought was already made of stone, softened. He could not bear to force her or threaten her to change her decision. He had been given up, so he accepted being given up. In the past, he had sworn that no matter what decision Yun Shishir made, he would always trust her and protect her. Therefore, Gong Fan could not bear to blame her. Especially after seeing her tears, he could not harden his heart to face her. However, since it was her decision, he silently accepted it. Gong Fan knew and could tell that Yun Shishir must have been in a lot of pain when she made this decision. She was hesitating, and even now, she was still hesitating. He did not want to beg her to make a new decision because of this. After all, if this went on, he would feel tired and so would the others. Since it was so torturous, it was better to let go and give up. Everyone would be free and easy, and it would be much easier. Gong Fan knew that if that day really came, Yun Shishir would definitely be overwhelmed by guilt. He curled his lips and a layer of ice suddenly appeared in his eyes. Xiao Chen is right. Gong Fan looked at Yun Shishir coldly. I am indeed cold and heartless. However, how can you say that I betrayed you? In this world, the weak are prey to the strong. Similarly, although we have different personalities, we both have the right to occupy this body. When Yun Shishir heard this, she did not expect him to say such cold and cruel words. The weak are prey to the strong? Ha, between me and him, whoever has the ability has the right to occupy this body. If he doesn't have the ability, He deserves to be reduced to ashes. Am I wrong? As Gong Fan spoke, the expression on his face became even colder. It's best that I disappear immediately. Otherwise, sooner or later, I will make you disappear. This body will truly belong to me. As he spoke, he turned around and was about to return to his room. Yun Shirshir stood up in disbelief and stared at him in disbelief. Who instructed you to say these words? Orders. Gong Fan did not even turn his head as he said indifferently. No one instigated me. These are my words from the bottom of my heart. That's all. With that, he walked away, leaving Xiao Chen and Yun Shirshir looking at each other. When Gong Fan returned to his room and saw Yun Shirshir and Xiao Chen outside the door with a bang, Yun Shirshir was still in a daze. She found it hard to believe that Gong Fan had said those words from the bottom of his heart. He wasn't sincere. What's going on? Why did he become like this? Yun Shirshir shook her head. He's not Gong Fan. Gong Fan wouldn't do this to me. Mommy, calm down. Xiao Chen also felt that there was something suspicious about this. Why did Gong Fan suddenly become so cold and indifferent in just one night? He even said such overboard words? What happened? Yun Shirshir couldn't help but feel suspicious. Could it be that this is another personality that he has? Otherwise, why would Gong Fan say such heartless words? Gong Fan has always been like this. Have you forgotten how he was when he first came back? To us, to you, to Daddy, and to Yueyao, he seemed to look at everyone with hatred, right? Chapter 42:55. That night, Gong Fan didn't come out to have dinner with everyone. Instead, he hid in his room alone. He had a very serious stomach problem. Yun Shirshir had also reminded him about this. If he didn't eat on time, his stomach would hurt and it would be terrible. However, Gong Fan didn't want to come out. He locked himself in the dark room and curled up on the bed. He missed dinner time and his stomach was indeed in so much pain that it started to twitch. He clutched his stomach tightly, feeling cold all over. If he really decided to leave, since Yun Shirshir had decided to give up on him, then he shouldn't be reluctant to leave. Be cold to the end. Let the coldness end everything. If he was cold to the end, the heartache would probably be less. Gong Fan turned over with difficulty and casually turned on the bedside lamp. He searched around the bedside table and, as expected, he found a bottle of stomach pain medicine. Without the medicine, he chewed and swallowed the dregs. He returned to the bed and wrapped himself tightly with the blanket, shivering. Torture, like self-abuse, giving up. At the door, Yun Shirshir paced back and forth at the door with the food that had been reheated 3 times. She looked at it anxiously but couldn't muster the courage to knock on the door. Mu Yaja saw that she kept pacing in front of Gong Fan's door and didn't even bother to eat. He felt helpless and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He walked over and patted her shoulder gently. You haven't eaten yet. Eat first. However, Yun Shirshir couldn't care less about eating. When she thought of Gong Fan's stomach problem, how could she care about herself? If he doesn't eat dinner, his stomach will definitely hurt. However, I've been standing at the door for a long time and haven't heard any movement. Could it be that his stomach is hurting and he's enduring it and unwilling to tell me? Yun Shirshir rubbed her forehead in frustration and her eyes turned red again. Why is he like this? He was fine yesterday, but he suddenly changed today. I was caught off guard. As she said this, she tried to knock on the door again and said gently, Are you there? Gong Fan, come out and eat. Okay? Mommy made your favorite century egg and lean meat porridge. If you don't have an appetite, eat a little to fill your stomach. After a while, there was still no response from the other side of the door. Yun Shirshir bit her lip, her heart aching. Xiao Chen couldn't take it anymore. He pushed Yun Shirshir aside and slammed the door with his fist. Gong Fan, come out and eat. Do you hear me? He couldn't bear to see Yun Shirshir being wronged like this, especially when she had brought out her sincerity. Yet he had abandoned her. He was not qualified. However, even though he knocked on the door loudly, there was no response from inside at all. Was he completely ignoring them? Xiao Chen was instantly enraged. Ignoring Yun Shirshir's attempts to stop him, he lifted his leg and kicked the door open. His violence shocked Yun Shirshir. She rushed in behind him and saw that Xiao Yichen had just turned on the lights and saw a figure curled up under the blankets on the bed. Xiao Yichen, who was originally in a rage, saw a bulging figure under the messy blankets. He walked over suspiciously and lifted the blankets. However, he saw Gong Fan hugging his arms and his body curled up like a shrimp. His forehead was covered in beads of cold sweat. Beads of sweat were dripping down from his temples. His pajamas were also drenched in cold sweat. Chapter 42:56. What's going on? Xiao Yichen was shocked. Yun Shirshir and Mu Yaja surrounded him anxiously. Amidst the panic, Mu Yaja was sharper. He saw the painkillers on the bedside table and immediately said, "Could it be that his stomach is hurting again? His face is so pale. Could it be that he has low blood sugar?" Yun Shirshir said again, "After all, he hasn't eaten for a day. Maybe his blood sugar is low." Xiao Yichen couldn't care less. He bent down slightly, put his hands around the back of Gong Fan's neck and knees, and carried him up. "Let's go to the hospital," Xiao Yichen said and hurried out of the door. Even though he was also extremely frightened, he immediately made a decision in his moment of desperation. Mu Yaja and Yun Shirshir looked at each other and immediately walked toward the garage. At the hospital, Gong Fan was hurriedly sent to the emergency room. The three of them waited nervously outside the door for a long time before the door of the emergency room finally opened. The doctor removed his mask and walked out with a serious expression. When Yun Shirshir saw him, she immediately went up to him worriedly and blocked his way. "Doctor, how is he?" The doctor glanced at her and asked, "Are you the child's family?" Before Yun Shirshir could answer, he glanced at Xiao Yichen behind Yun Shirshir. Seeing that he looked exactly like Gong Fan, he understood. "Fortunately, you sent him here in time. The child is suffering from acute morphine poisoning. It's probably caused by accidentally taking too many painkillers. We've already pumped his stomach to induce vomiting. If he was sent here any later, I'm afraid that the child would suffer from respiratory failure due to the morphine poisoning. The consequences would be unimaginable." Morphine poisoning. When Yun Shirshir heard this, she couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. If Xiao Yichen hadn't barged in, perhaps Gong Fan would have suffered from respiratory failure due to the morphine poisoning. And all of this, they didn't know about it. Yun Shirshir lamented over Xiao Yichen's violent barging. If it hadn't been for him, perhaps Gong Fan would have been in deep trouble. Why did this child take so many painkillers? The doctor wondered if Gong Fan had suicidal tendencies. Yun Shirshir knew what he was suspecting and answered, "He probably took painkillers because he has a serious stomach problem. In the past, when he took medicine, I was the one who was supervising him. The dosage on was strict. This time, we weren't by his side. He threw a tantrum and refused to eat. His stomach, so he took the medicine. And his stomach on the pain. Like this." The doctor's tone on was, "Your parent on is too. This kind of dangerous medicine should be kept by the parents themselves. How can it be placed in a place where children can easily touch it?" Yun Shirshir pursed her lips and lowered her head. She accepted the doctor's criticism guiltily. In fact, the doctor thought that Gong Fan was as childish as an ordinary child. Actually, only Yun Shirshir knew that Gong Fan knew that he could not take too much medicine. The big problem was that it was too painful this time. He had given up on himself and swallowed a lot at once. However, he did not know the consequences and almost caused such a disaster. "You're too irresponsible as a parent. You put the medicine where the child can see it. If he didn't know, he would have taken it all at once. Now that you've sent him back, I'm afraid there's nothing you can do to save him." Chapter 42:57. Mu Yaja looked a little unhappy. When he saw Yun Shirshir lowering her head and apologizing sincerely, he couldn't help but feel sorry for her and pulled her into his arms. "We'll be careful next time. How's the child?" He quickly changed the topic. The doctor stopped there and heaved a sigh of relief. "He's been saved, but he has to be hospitalized for a few days. This child doesn't seem to have a good constitution and needs to be taken care of carefully. He'll be transferred to the ward soon. You guys can watch over him in the ward." Okay. Soon, Gong Fan was pushed out of the emergency room and transferred to the intensive care unit. Yun Shirshir came to the ward and saw Gong Fan lying on the bed with a pale face. There was no trace of blood on his face. His eyes were tightly shut and his hands were slightly curled. He was motionless and lifeless. Just by looking at it, she felt as if a knife was being twisted in her heart. How did he become like this? Yun Shirshir casually pulled a stool by the bed and sat down. Her heart ached as she held Gong Fan's cold hand. In his coma, Gong Fan seemed to realize this warm touch and couldn't help but hold her hand, unwilling to let go of this warmth. Yun Shirshir's heart ached even more. How did he become like this? What exactly happened to Gong Fan's body? Mu Yaja and Xiaoi Chen stood at the door, not daring to disturb her. Now, Gong Fan was on an 4-drip and Yun Shirshir was guarding him without moving. When Xiaoi Chen saw this, he said to Mu Yaja, "Tonight, I'll stay here and watch over brother. Daddy, do you want to go home first? You have to wake up early tomorrow morning. How can I go to work in peace in this situation?" Mu Yaja laughed helplessly. Even though he usually looked deep and didn't seem to care much about Gong Fan, he was still his son after all. It was just that compared to a mother's love, a father's love had always been as deep as a mountain. He said, "I've applied for leave tomorrow. Today, I'll stay in the ward to accompany you. Why don't I send you back and rest early?" Xiaoi Chen frowned and said honestly, "I can't sleep peacefully with little brother like this. Then stay here and accompany them." Mu Yaja patted his head. "Go and get some hot water." "Oh, got it." Xiaoi Chen briskly picked up 2 bottles of hot water and walked to the boiling room. Mu Yaja walked over to Yun Shirshir's side, gently held her shoulders, and squeezed them. Yun Shirshir looked up at him. "Don't worry. Since the doctor said that he'll be fine, there's nothing to worry about. I keep having the feeling that he has something on his mind, but he doesn't tell me." After Mu Yaja heard this, he suddenly lowered his voice and asked, "Could it be that he accidentally heard the conversation outside yesterday?" Yun Shirshir turned pale with fright. "How is that possible? Other than that, I can't think of any other possibilities. Perhaps he couldn't sleep in the middle of the night and accidentally overheard our conversation in the back garden. Who knows? Could it be?" Yun Shirshir couldn't help but shudder at the thought of it. If Gong Fan heard this, then he would definitely be bitterly disappointed. If he were in Gong Fan's shoes and heard that he had been abandoned, he would feel especially upset. If that was really the case, she wouldn't be surprised by Gong Fan's abnormal behavior today. Chapter 4258. When Gong Jie returned to China, it was already 1 o'clock in the morning. It was a full 10 hours of time difference, but he had already gotten used to it. The villa had a large private helipad specially reserved for helicopters. However, this helipad was very close to the villa. Gong Jie thought that if the helicopter landed directly on this helipad, the loud noise would definitely wake Natalia up. At this time, she might have already fallen asleep. Hence, he parked the helicopter at the helipad of another hotel and drove to the villa. Hua Jin was already asleep. In the middle of the night, his phone suddenly rang. He sat up in bed and picked up the phone beside his pillow. Only then did he realize that it was Gong Jie's number. He picked up the phone. Gong Jie's voice came from the other end. "You're asleep. If not, oh please, what time was it now?" It was already 1 o'clock in the morning. Why wouldn't he be asleep? "It's so late. What's the matter?" Gong Jie said, "I'm here. Where are you?" "I'm home." "Then why don't you just come up?" Hua Jin silently rolled his eyes. However, Gong Jie said awkwardly, "I'm lost." "Huh?" Hua Jin's eyes widened as if he had heard a fairy tale. "Lost?" "Yes, I came in from the back garden, but I got lost in the garden." When Hua Jin heard this, he couldn't help but feel cold. Indeed, the interior area of this villa was already astonishingly large. The complimentary garden area alone covered an area of more than 20 acres. In addition to the intricate garden structure and the lush shadows of the trees, Hua Jin had once lost his way in the garden. "How did you come in from the back garden?" "The garage is in the back garden." Gong Jie gradually lost his patience and his voice became deeper. "Come and pick me up." After that, he hung up the phone. Hua Jin let out a long sigh. Gong Jie had returned to visit Natalia. It seemed that, at least for the time being, he wouldn't be able to have a peaceful day. Hua Jin stood up, walked to the back door, and turned on the lights in the back garden in advance. He couldn't figure out the intricate route for a long time, but if the lights in the back garden were on, it would be of great help in finding the path. Can you hear where my voice is coming from? I heard you. Then do you see a huge stone sculpture here? I saw it. Yes, just walk in this direction and you'll be able to walk out. The huge back garden was like a huge garden maze at night. If one was not careful, it would be easy to get lost. Hua Jin rarely came to the back garden. Natalia, on the other hand, liked to wander around the back garden. This place was almost her world. The swing, the garden, the stone sculptures. This place was her little world. Gong Jie, on the other hand, was an out-and-out clown. He actually got lost in the backyard. After a while, Hua Jin finally heard Gong Jie's footsteps gradually approaching. He looked in the direction of the footsteps. Through the layers of shadows of the trees, he finally caught a glimpse of Gong Jie's figure shuttling through the garden. Hua Jin immediately went up to him. Here, this is the exit. He went over and unexpectedly bumped into Gong Jie, who was full of hostility. After searching the back garden for so long, his patience was basically exhausted. Chapter 42:59. Hua Jin tried his best to hold back his laughter and pretended to be calm as he said, "This is the villa you bought." Gong Jie snorted when he heard that. The real estate consultant didn't say that this would be a backyard where people would get lost. He thought that he was going around in circles. No matter how he walked, it would be the same. In the end, he would definitely return to the starting point. If Hua Jin hadn't turned on the lights, he would have been searching here for an entire night. Hua Jin sighed. Why did you come back so late? Takes more than 10 hours to fly from Hurricane to here. We also have to transfer to a helicopter. Why? My plane can't land here. I don't have permission to land. With that, Gong Jie asked again, "What about Natalia? Is she asleep?" "Yes, she's asleep. It's already so late. She must have gone to bed long ago." "Oh," Gong Jie said. "Then I'll go up and take a look." "Okay. Do you still remember which row and which room her room is in?" Gong Jie was stumped by the question. In that case, it seemed that he really didn't remember. He had bought this villa for Hua Jin and Natalia. It had to be said that it was really big. Not only did it occupy a lot of space in a backyard, but the entire villa was also very big. It was like a century-old manor. It was said that this villa was the king of villas in this area. It was even more impressive than Yun Shan Shi, which was under Mu Yaja's name. When Yun Shishir came to visit for the first time, she was very envious. She had never seen such a big villa before. Only someone as rich as Gong Jie could buy it with his eyes closed. He didn't feel anything at all. Gong Jie was used to living in big places. The land that the Gong family occupied could no longer be measured by square meters. It was a magnificent castle, and it was also a super mansion that was one of a kind in the world. Gong Jie and Hua Jin walked up the stairs one after another. Hua Jin led him to Natalia's room. After entering the room, he turned on the wall lamp. Gong Jie had just walked in when he smelled a fragrance. It was Natalia's natural fragrance. There was a faint fragrance on her body. It was hard to tell what it was, but it was especially refreshing. Gong Jie slowly walked into the room. His footsteps were very light as he was afraid of waking her up. When he walked to the bedside and saw the person sleeping soundly on the bed, his originally sharp eyebrows slightly relaxed. He gently sat down on the side of the bed. However, the moment he sat down, Natalia's eyelids suddenly fluttered, and she slowly woke up. She opened her eyes and focused her gaze on the man sitting on the side of the bed. When she recognized him, she was overjoyed all of a sudden. "Daddy!" Gong Jie was a little absent-minded when he saw that she was awake. "Did I wake you up?" "No." Natalia pursed her lips and sat up on the bed. She opened her arms and softly snuggled into his arms and threw herself at him. Gong Jie hugged her with both hands, but Natalia's muffled voice came from his arms. "Why did you come back so late?" Hua Jin had told her that Gong Jie would be back soon. When Natalia found out that he would be back, she waited day after day, but he didn't come back. She couldn't help but feel a little disheartened. That night, she slept absent-mindedly. She was afraid that after she fell asleep, Gong Jie would return and she wouldn't be able to welcome him immediately. For a child, welcoming the return of a family member was a ritual. Chapter 4260. As she waited, she was so tired that she fell asleep in a daze. However, she didn't fall into a deep sleep. Thus, when Gong Jie came in and sat on the bed, she was startled awake. At that moment, she was like a little kitten, nestled in his arms. Gong Jie couldn't help but feel tender affection for her. The tedious matters of the past few days were instantly swept away and replaced by happiness. He hugged her and said gently, "Good girl. Sleep early. It's already so late." "No, I want to hug you for a while longer." Felt like a century since she last saw him. Natalia was very introverted and rarely mentioned to Hua Jin that she missed Gong Jie. However, just because she didn't say it didn't mean that she didn't miss him. Gong Jie caressed her cheek gently and couldn't help but pinch it. "Have you been good at home?" "I've always been good. Mommy can testify." "Mommy?" Upon hearing this, Gong Jie widened his eyes in shock. Why did the little guy suddenly have a mommy for no reason when he wasn't around? At that moment, Hua Jin, who was standing by the door, heard Natalia's words. He blushed guiltily and cleared his throat awkwardly. Natalia acted as though she hadn't heard anything and hooked her finger at Gong Jie. Gong Jie obediently went over and heard her whisper, "He's mommy." She pointed at him with her finger. Seeing that she was pointing at him, Hua Jin guessed that she was whispering something. In a moment of panic, he said, "Hey Natalia, don't talk nonsense." Gong Jie looked back meaningfully and sized him up with a deep gaze. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Mommy?" Hua Jin was speechless. "Heh, did you secretly change your sex when I wasn't around?" "No," Hua Jin muttered pitifully. "She wanted to call me that. I can't argue with a child, right? I told her not to call me that in front of others. It's fine if she calls me that in private. Because I see that everyone else has a mommy. Why don't I have one? I don't have anyone else by my side. Besides, no matter whose mommy it is, she's not as pretty as my Hua Jin's mommy." Cough, cough. Luckily, Hua Jin didn't drink any water. Otherwise, he would have choked on a big mouthful of water. "Stop calling me that." Hua Jin emphasized it again and glared at her. "Otherwise, I'll be laughed at." Natalia covered her mouth and snickered. When Hua Jin glared at her again, she meekly replied, "Got it." Even though she expressed her acknowledgement, she still had a smile on her face. What Hua Jin did not notice was that Gong Jie, who was beside him, could not help but curve his lips into a gentle smile. However, he deliberately turned his face away so that Hua Jin could not see the faint smile at the corner of his lips. "Stop fooling around," he grumbled. Between his words, his authority as a father was fully displayed. Natalia knew that Gong Jie wouldn't allow her to sleep late. She replied with a disappointed "oh," and went back to bed obediently. Gong Jie covered her with the blanket. Natalia asked carefully from under the blanket, "What's the weather like tomorrow? Is it sunny?" Gong Jie turned to look at Hua Jin. "If I remember correctly, it should be sunny tomorrow." Chapter 4261. I want to fly a kite. Fly a kite? Gong Jie was a little surprised. When Hua Jin heard this, he immediately said, "I bought a strife kite some time ago, but recently it has been cloudy. The weather changes all the time. If it's not raining, it's too cold. So, she has been waiting for the weather to clear up so that she can fly a kite." When Gong Jie heard this, he nodded. "Didn't you say that it's going to be sunny? Sleep early. After breakfast tomorrow, we'll fly a kite together." "Daddy, do you know how to fly a kite?" "No." "Ah. Then you said that you'll take me to fly a kite. Don't you know how to fly?" Gong Jie curled his lips. "You can teach me. Daddy learns very quickly." "Okay, then it's a promise. We'll fly a kite together. Don't go back on your word." "Okay, it's a promise. After getting his promise, Natalia fell asleep peacefully. Gong Jie and Hua Jin left the room. Hua Jin immediately said, "Shall I get you a bed? Where's the bathroom? I want to take a shower." "Go upstairs and turn left. It's the second room. That's my room. You can go and take a shower." As Hua Jin and Natalia were the only ones staying here, the other guest rooms did not have beds. Hua Jin wanted to go to the nanny's room and ask the nanny to make a bed, but Gong Jie had already gone upstairs to take a shower. "Get me a set of pajamas." He ordered him as if he was instructing a servant. Although Hua Jin was reluctant to do so, he agreed to it quickly. "Okay." Hua Jin nodded. So, while Gong Jie was in the bathroom, Hua Jin went to the walk-in closet and took out a brand new bathrobe and a new set of clothes. When he walked into the room, he said to Gong Jie through the bathroom door, "Can I leave the bathrobe outside? Is that okay?" Gong Jie's cold voice came from inside. "You want me to go out naked?" Hua Jin felt his face heat up just imagining that scene. "Forget it. Send him in." Hence, Hua Jin walked to the door and knocked. "Can I come in? I'll send it in for you." As soon as he finished speaking, the door opened from the inside. Hua Jin had thought that the Gong Jie would at most open a small gap, but in the end, it was opened wide, and the steam in the bathroom suddenly rushed out. He couldn't see clearly, so he waved his hand gently to disperse the fog. Suddenly, he saw Gong Jie standing at the door of the shower room, wiping his wet hair with a towel. His gaze uncontrollably swayed downwards, following the fine and distinct lines of the skin. His gaze followed the droplets of water that continued to slide downwards until he caught a glimpse of it. Suddenly, his eyes widened, and he didn't dare to look anymore. He abruptly turned around, as if he was sitting on a speeding roller coaster. His heart suddenly beat violently. Gong Jie noticed his big movement and frowned slightly. He turned around and saw Hua Jin's back facing him nervously. For a moment he was confused. What was he doing? Clothes. Oh. Hua Jin was absent-minded. With his back facing him, he passed the bathrobe behind him. Gong Jie looked at his nervous expression, as if he was avoiding it. Then, he looked at his own naked body and seemed to understand something. "Why, you're shy like a woman." "Like a woman?" Hua Jin couldn't help but frown. What did he mean by like a woman? Gong Jie asked again, "You've never seen another man's body before?" Chapter 42-62. Gong Jie raised his eyebrows disapprovingly. As he wiped his hair, he said to him as though he wanted to prove something, "Turn around." "What?" Hua Jin only felt that he was teasing him. "Didn't you ask me to bring the bathrobe in? Now that I've brought it in, take it. I'm going out." Gong Jie heard this but deliberately didn't take it. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked at him calmly. Hua Jin's back was facing him. He didn't move at all, like a stone statue. Gong Jie was actually a little interested. "Turn around." "What?" Hua Jin frowned and suddenly became vigilant. "Are you a pervert?" This guy was obviously not wearing any clothes. Yet he still asked him to turn around and look at his nakedness? Was he a pervert? "I asked you to turn around. Didn't you hear me?" His tone became a little dangerous. Hua Jin reluctantly turned around, but he deliberately squinted his eyes and carefully sized him up. Gong Jie was standing in the fog, so he couldn't see clearly for a moment. However, he imagined that he was not wearing any clothes. So Hua Jin deliberately didn't look down but stared straight at his face. Here, the fog gradually dispersed, and Hua Jin's face became even hotter. Just as he was about to turn his head and look away, he caught a glimpse of a towel wrapped around his lower body. Only then did he let out an embarrassed sigh. He thought he wasn't wearing anything, so he was wrapped in a towel. Damn it! He made him so nervous. He handed the bathrobe to him with both hands. "Take it, your bathrobe." As though he could see his uneasiness, Gong Jie's eyes flashed with a hint of mockery. He didn't take the bathrobe but asked casually, "Where am I sleeping tonight? I'll tidy up a room for you later." "It's so late. I'll sleep in this room." Hua Jin gritted his teeth. He guessed that this guy must be deliberately making things difficult for him, so he groaned. Fine, if you want to sleep, you can sleep in this room. I'll prepare another room. He didn't want to wait for Gong Jie to reach out and take it, so he directly stuffed the bathrobe into his arms. Just as he was about to turn around, Gong Jie suddenly grabbed his arm and pulled him back. Hua Jin did not expect that this guy would grab his arm. He was caught off guard and fell backwards. In his imagination, he should have fallen hard on the cold marble floor of the bathroom. When he finally stabilized his center of gravity, he suddenly realized that he had fallen on someone's chest. Gong Jie coldly glanced at the person in his arms who was getting more and more nervous. He snorted, "Is there a need to clean up the room? The bed is so big, let's sleep together." Perhaps it was because the temperature in the bathroom was too high or for some other reason. Hua Jin's face turned even redder, as if he was holding a mouthful of turbid air. "You don't have to make do with it. Don't you always sleep alone? You don't have to squeeze into the same bed with me. When I went to Africa in the past, I always slept with 2 bodyguards." Gong Jie paused for a moment and said, "Besides, the bed in this room is so big, it won't be a problem for 2 people to sleep together." Hua Jin felt strange and couldn't help but ask, "Why do you have to sleep with me?" Gong Jie heard that and laughed instead of answering. He lowered his head and leaned closer to him. He lowered his voice and looked at him flirtatiously. "I find it strange too. Why are you deliberately avoiding me?" Hua Jin was stunned. "You." Chapter 4263. "You. What are you hiding from?" The evening breeze gently blew past the window and through the crack in the door, brushing against the back of his neck. On his face, the steam in the bathroom and the hot air he exhaled as he spoke, one fire and one ice. It was like 2 worlds of ice and fire. Hua Jin couldn't help but feel his skin shiver. It was as if countless cold cicadas were seeping out of his pores, giving him goosebumps. He didn't dare to look into his eyes. He had a feeling that his eyes were so deep and contained countless meanings. "What are you hiding from?" Seeing his reaction, Gong Jie felt even more puzzled. He got closer to him as if deliberately provoking him. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Have you never seen a man's body?" "What do you mean?" "Otherwise." Gong Jie lowered his head to look at himself, then looked at him. "Why are you so sensitive?" Those who don't know would think that you like me." As soon as he said this, Hua Jin pushed him away violently. "You'd better not say such things." Gong Jie was surprised by his resistance. In front of him, Hua Jin had been suppressing his anger, not daring to say anything. From the time they first met to the time they slowly got to know each other, Hua Jin's attitude towards him had always been one of fear and avoidance. Even if he was angry, he didn't dare to say it out loud. It was as if he was afraid of him. This was the first time he had resisted him and hit him. Gong Jie couldn't help but be interested. He gritted his teeth and said, "Are pranks fun?" "Pranks? Do you like to play pranks on others so much? Just because you're the crown prince of the Gong family, you can act high and mighty and not care about other people's feelings. I don't like it when you play pranks on me. Please don't do it in the future." Hua Jin seemed to have lost his temper. In front of Gong Jie, such resistance was nothing compared to a cat's scratch. He didn't care about it at all. However, this was already Hua Jin's greatest resistance. However, the way he lost his temper didn't seem that dazzling. Although he had tried his best to use a stiff tone, in Gong Jie's eyes, it was insignificant. However, the more he acted this way, the more guilty he was. Gong Jie enjoyed the man's anger without restraint. His thin lips curled up slightly as he crossed his arms arrogantly in front of his chest. Unlike his angry reaction, he was extremely calm and even had a hint of mockery. "When you're angry, you look guilty." Hua Jin was momentarily at a loss for words. He could only stare at him, flabbergasted. "That's right." He suddenly, as if he had woken up from a dream. Why was he so angry? Why was he so angry? From an outsider's point of view, there was indeed an inexplicable sense of guilt. However, why was he guilty when he said those words? It was just giving him a bathrobe. Why was he so evasive? It was as if he was afraid of looking at his body. Hua Jin furrowed his brows. Even he felt that his reaction was strange. Do you like women or men? Gong Jie threw out a sudden question when he was at his most absent-minded. Hua Jin, who was in a daze, didn't even have time to react. He instinctively replied, I don't know. Chapter 42-64. Hua Jin, who was in a daze, didn't even have time to react before he instinctively replied, I don't know. As soon as he said that, not only Gong Jie, but even he himself was stunned. His mind was in a mess, and the way Gong Jie looked at him changed slightly, as if he was scrutinizing him. After being stunned for a long time, Gong Jie suddenly laughed and said in a helpless tone, Do you like men or women? How come you don't even know? Hua Jin pursed his lips and turned his face to the side. He didn't understand what was wrong with him either. He should have answered women without hesitation, but he actually hesitated. Gong Jie seemed to have an inquisitive attitude as he lowered his head slightly and inched closer to him. At that moment, the two people's lips were very close. Hua Jin looked up slightly and could see Gong Jie's mesmerizing eyelashes. Those damn eyelashes. They were so long and so close to his eyes that his vision was a little out of focus. Gong Jie was especially tall and slender. He was like a wall that blocked him in the corner. His tall figure cast a shadow over his body. That shadow seemed to contain 1,000 pounds of strength, pressing down on him until he almost couldn't breathe. Hua Jin gripped the bathrobe in his hands. His knuckles were white, and the collar of the bathrobe was almost twisted out of shape. Because of Gong Jie's immense aura, he felt like he couldn't breathe. Gong Jie looked at him from the side. Seeing how nervous he was, his eyes flashed and he suddenly straightened his back. Why are you so nervous? As he said that, he curled his lips and took the bathrobe from Hua Jin's hands. He draped it over his body, tied a knot around his waist, and left the bathroom. Hua Jin, who was behind him, seemed to have lost all his strength. He straightened his body and barely managed to stand. Leaning against the wall, he walked out and saw that Gong Jie had already walked to the wine cabinet. He casually picked up a bottle of wine and poured himself a glass. Hua Jin immediately stood up awkwardly and tried to maintain his calm appearance. Gong Jie held the wine glass and gently swirled the red wine inside before taking a sip. He looked at him silently. Not knowing why, Hua Jin thought of a leopard, ready to hunt from his gaze, and couldn't help but shudder. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. His gaze was so piercing that it made his hair stand. Hence, he hurriedly said, You'll sleep here tonight. As he said that, he turned around and left the room in a sorry state. Gong Jie stared meaningfully at his departing back as he put down his goblet, his eyes regaining their usual frostiness. He went into the guest room. Hua Jin made the bed in one go. By this time, the nanny and servants were already asleep, and he did not want to wake them up. Hence, he made the bed himself. It was only after he made the bed and went to bed that he realized that the silk blanket was a little thin. However, he could not be bothered to rummage through it, so he curled his body up to ward off the cold. However, even though he was tired, he didn't feel sleepy lying on the bed. Hua Jin tossed and turned on the bed, but he couldn't fall asleep. The night became unusually unbearable. For Yun Shirshir, it was also an unbearable night. Chapter 42-65. She had already asked the doctor several times to confirm that there were no major problems. It was just a symbolic observation period, so she had to be more careful. Yun Shirshir did not dare to sleep either. She was afraid that if she slept too deeply, there would be no one to take care of Gong Fan when he woke up. Actually, she knew that she did not sleep deeply, but she could not fall asleep either. Her mind was filled with Gong Fan's disappointed and lonely gaze. He was so lonely that he was like a person trapped on an isolated island. Previously, she was still puzzled as to why he had suddenly become so cold. Now, she realized in annoyance that it was probably as Mu Yaja had said. Perhaps, he had accidentally heard her conversation with Mu Yaja last night. Yun Shirshir was filled with regret. Even though she had already thought about what she had said back then, she started to regret it again as she looked at the sleeping face. Gong Fan was also her child. Why did she give up just like that? But on second thought, she did not want to use Yu as a stake after all. If she was the one blocking the way, she would be willing to take a gamble regardless of the cost. However, if it was Yu, she was worried that she would not be able to afford to lose. She did not dare to take the risk. The ward was very big. Even though it was almost spring and it was difficult to find a ward for the changing season, Wuxia still tried his best to negotiate and finally settled on a luxurious ward. There were 2 rooms and 1 living room. Wuxia and Chen slept in the other room. Initially, Wuxia said that he would stay behind to accompany them. When they were tired, they could just rest on the sofa for a while. He let Yun Shirshir and Chen sleep in the other room. However, Yun Shirshir could not fall asleep. Even if she was sleepy, she had a lot on her mind and refused to sleep. Wuxia knew what was on her mind. He also knew that she wanted to make use of every inch of time to accompany Gong Fan. So he did not say anything. He reminded her to wake him up if she was tired. He would take care of her and let her sleep. Yun Shirshir agreed verbally, but how could she really bear to sleep by herself? She couldn't sleep well. Yu used to be a thorn in her heart. Ever since he was born, his physique had been poor and his body was weak. She had been trying her best to nourish his body. It had not been easy for his body to recover, but now his illness had increased. Another worry for Gong Fan. Beside Gong Fan's bed, there was an accompanying bed. When it was folded, it was a chair. When it was unfolded, it was a single bed. She lay on the single bed, but from time to time, she would sit up and look at Gong Fan's face. She looked again and again, and as she looked, she unconsciously began to cry. She felt that she really didn't deserve to be a good mother. Back then, Chen had once told Yu that he envied Yu for having mommy by his side since he was young. However, Yun Shirshir was upset that she had kept Yu by her side out of selfishness. If he had been able to control his condition when he was young, he might not have ended up like this. Perhaps, if Yu had stayed by Wuxia's side at that time, he wouldn't have developed a dual personality because of those dark and bullied memories of his childhood. However, how could there be medicine for regret in this world? No matter how much she regretted it now, it was useless. Yun Shirshir could no longer sleep. She sat by the bed and carefully held Gong Fan's right hand. His originally thin arm had become swollen because of the 4 drip just now. A gentle pinch would create a dent that would not recover for a long time. His entire arm, including the back of his hand, was unbelievably cold. Chapter 42:66. His hand was really cold. It was probably because he had just finished the 2 bottles of 4 drip, so the temperature was frighteningly low. She placed the back of his hand on her cheek pitifully, trying to warm his hand with the warmth of her skin. Gong Fan's fingers curled up slightly in his faint state. She thought that he had woken up and immediately went over anxiously. However, he still didn't move. His eyes were tightly shut, and there were no signs of him waking up. Yun Shirshir's eyes fell in disappointment. How could she forget that the doctor said that the 4 drip had a calming component? Hence, he wouldn't wake up for a while. He would probably be unconscious until tomorrow afternoon and could only rely on the 4 drip to maintain his consciousness. Yun Shirshir leaned over and kissed his forehead gently. She choked and said, "Gong Fan, do you know? If there's really a conditional exchange in this world, I'm willing to use my life in exchange for you and Yu's safety. You're very important to me. I really don't want to let go of your hand." She pursed her lips and raised her head, forcing her tears back. She couldn't cry anymore. If it was early in the morning, Wuxia and Chen would be worried if they saw her red eyes. Yun Shirshir leaned against the back of his hand and quietly stared at his sleeping face. The next day, Hua Jin was woken up by the cold. The morning breeze was the coldest. Even though the windows were tightly shut, the slightly chilly morning breeze made the entire room seem like it was covered in a layer of frost. Even though it was already the spring equinox, the weather was still as cold and hot as before. It might still be autumn in the morning, but it would be midsummer in the afternoon. At night, it might be midwinter. Hence, in such weather, Hua Jin always wore a thick coat when he went out. When the weather was hot, he would take off his coat. When it was cold, he would put it on again. However, he was obviously careless. The thin blanket and the cold morning forced him to wake up. When he woke up, his limbs seemed to have stiffened and he couldn't help but tremble. He sat up in bed and sneezed several times. He sniffed and realized that he had caught a cold. He rubbed his forehead with a headache. She could still get used to the temperature at night, but she didn't expect to get frostbite in the morning. Her clothes were in the master bedroom. She did not know if Gong Jie had woken up yet. According to Yun Shishir, ever since he was young, Gong Jie always had a bad morning temper. She wondered if he would be shocked out of the door by the Demon King's morning temper if he risked his life to sneak into the bedroom to get some clothes to wear. Just the thought of it was terrifying. Last night, he had fallen asleep in a daze while his thoughts were running wild. When he woke up, he was in a daze for a short while. Then he thought of Gong Jie's strange words and actions last night, which made him very annoyed. Hua Jin lazily laid down on the bed and rolled up the blanket. Just like that, he pitifully restrained himself under the blanket. He rubbed his left foot against the back of his foot, trying to use the most primitive method of rubbing to generate heat. Damn it, the blanket was made of silk. She couldn't warm up the blanket and sheets for an entire night. Her toes were almost numb from the cold. Hua Jin's face was full of resentment. He was ashamed that he had felt warm when Gong Jie rushed back to the country because of Natalia's words. Now he was the one who was suffering. Why did he have to invite this Demon King back? Wasn't he just looking for trouble? Chapter 42-67. Just like that, Hua Jin drifted back to sleep. In his half-awake state, he felt that someone had entered the room. Even though he wasn't in a deep sleep, he was so sleepy that he couldn't open his eyes. In a daze, he felt that someone had gently covered him with a thick blanket. Then that person left the room quietly. When he woke up, the sun was already shining brightly outside the window. Hua Jin sat up on the bed and felt that his body was a little heavy. When he looked up, he realized that there was really a blanket covering his body. Recalling what had happened in his daze, he thought that it was just a dream. He didn't expect that it was real. Then, who could have covered him with a blanket? Hua Jin's heart was filled with doubts and he couldn't figure out what was going on. He lifted the blanket and got out of bed. He shuffled to the door in his slippers and saw the servant, Auntie Gue, cleaning the room. When he saw her, he guessed that Auntie Gue must have seen him sleeping here when she was cleaning the room. She was afraid that he would catch a cold, so she added a blanket for him. "Good morning, Auntie Gue." Hua Jin smiled and greeted her. Auntie Gue looked up. When she saw him, she was slightly surprised. Young master, why are you sleeping in this room?" Only then did she realize that she had committed a huge taboo by cleaning the door of the room he was sleeping in. As a servant, when the master was resting, they wouldn't step within 10 meters of him unless he had already woken up. Only then would they enter the floor where they were resting to clean. Hua Jin was startled. He thought that Auntie Gue had added a blanket for him when she was cleaning the room. Why wasn't it her? Auntie Gue saw that he was startled and asked carefully, "I didn't know that you were sleeping in this room. Did I wake you up?" "Oh no." Hua Jin turned his head and looked around. He asked tentatively, "Did someone enter this room just now?" Auntie Gue looked around and shook her head in confusion. "No, I didn't see anyone. I just came up." "What the hell?" Hua Jin muttered. Auntie Gue didn't hear him clearly. She looked at him with a puzzled expression, as if waiting for his instructions. Hua Jin smiled. "It's nothing. You go ahead." "Yes. By the way, young Master Gong and young Miss are already downstairs." "Are they up yet?" "Yes, I woke up long ago." Young Miss woke up early in the morning. For some reason, she was especially excited today. She said that you guys agreed to fly a kite today. She said that she couldn't sleep, so she went to the back garden to play for a while. Then, seeing that you guys weren't up for a long time, she went upstairs to wake young Master Gong up. Auntie Gue reported Natalia's situation to Hua Jin as usual. Hua Jin nodded. "Got it." As he spoke, he held on to the escalator and went downstairs. When he arrived downstairs, he saw Natalia choosing a kite. Hua Jin had bought many kites a while ago. Natalia liked many different styles, but she couldn't pick her favorite. Regardless of which style she liked, she didn't like any of them. Hua Jin thought that since kites weren't expensive anyway, he might as well buy all of them. He bought a total of 5 kites, and Gong Jie and Natalia were in the midst of choosing one. How about we fly this today? Gong Jie picked up a kite. It had a design of Dubai on it. Chapter 42:68. Seeing this, Natalia's eyes widened. She pouted and said, I want to play this. As she spoke, she raised the Peppa Pig kite high up in the air and even imitated Peppa Pig's squeak. Gong Jie did not know whether to laugh or cry at her imitation of a pig's squeak. Who did you learn this from? Peppa Pig. Peppa Pig. Gong Jie paused for a moment and asked, Who is Peppa Pig? That's her. Natalia raised the Peppa Pig kite high up in front of her and said with a smile, That's her. A pig's face that looked like a hairdryer enlarged in front of Gong Jie's eyes. Peppa Pig was a children's cartoon. It was a children's cartoon that had a positive outlook on life and was very childlike. Hua Jin found out that Natalia liked cute cartoon characters, so he found this cartoon. In the beginning, Hua Jin accompanied Natalia to watch the movie. Since she enjoyed watching the movie, he decided to accompany her and watch the movie as well. In the end, as he watched, Hua Jin was also mesmerized. Who did you learn this squeak from? Gong Jie paused for a moment and said seriously, It's not ladylike to imitate a pig's squeak. I learned it from Dad Jin. Natalia betrayed Hua Jin without hesitation. Hua Jin was standing behind the two of them and eavesdropping. When he heard Natalia betraying him, Hua Jin felt embarrassed and cleared his throat. Natalia and Gong Jie turned around. When she saw him, Natalia pursed her lips and smiled. Why are you up so late, lazy pig? For some reason, when Hua Jin saw Gong Jie, he was reminded of the awkward scene last night. He felt uneasy and did not know where to put his hands. Gong Jie turned his head around again and scrutinized Peppa Pig's kite carefully. Natalia ran over and threw herself into Hua Jin's arms. She smiled and said, He asked me who I learned how to squeak from, so I told him the truth, because you told me that a lady can't lie, right? Hua Jin bit the bullet and nodded. You promised me. Natalia looked up at him expectantly. We'll fly a kite together in the afternoon. Are you choosing kites? Yes. What are you going to fly? Gong Jie suddenly said, How about 2 kites? 2? Yes. I'll fly one with Natalia and you fly one. When Natalia heard this, she thought that it was a good idea. Okay, 2. Hua Jin replied, But I don't know how to fly a kite. Learn. Hua Jin did not say anything else. In the end, Natalia picked 2 kites. One was her favorite Peppa Pig and the other was Hua Jin's favorite Dubai. Gong Jie liked the eagle-shaped kite. However, he did not like it so much that he wanted to fly it. He realized that Hua Jin seemed to still be a child at heart. Perhaps it was because of the lack of childhood that he sometimes showed a very childish side to him. When he saw his favorite toys, cartoons or cartoon dolls, he would love them so much that he could not put them down. Chapter 42:69. He did not like dolls, so he swept the doll off the bed with a sweep of his hand. However, just as the lights were about to go out, Gong Jie suddenly thought of something. He raised his eyebrows as he looked at the lonely little pig rolling on the edge of the bed. He felt that it was a little pitiful, like an abandoned orphan. Hence, he picked it up and put it back on the bed. Peppa Pig was a family of 4, and the one on Hua Jin's bed was George. The iconic little dinosaur had become very recognizable. Gong Jie held the doll and looked at it carefully. There was a faint fragrance on it. It was Hua Jin's scent. Hua Jin did not have the habit of wearing perfume, but he liked to apply body lotion after bathing. Gong Jie could smell that it was Oh Shouldn's body lotion. It was fragrant and not overpowering, but it was very comfortable to smell. The entire blanket was filled with Hua Jin's scent. This meant that he liked to sleep with this little pig in his arms. Gong Jie could not help but be surprised. He did not expect this fellow to sleep with a doll in his arms like a child. After lunch, the 3 of them went out. Initially, the nanny wanted to go with them so that she could take care of Natalia. However, Gong Jie said that it was not necessary. He ordered 2 bodyguards to follow them and they set off. In the morning, Hua Jin instructed the butler to go out and buy fabric for the picnic to cover the lawn. He also bought some snacks while he was at it. Natalia had been looking forward to a sunny day when they could go to the park to set up a barbecue grill. Gong Jie promised to take her there when he was free. On the way, Hua Jin suddenly thought of something and asked, "Since we're going to fly a kite, why don't we ask you and Xiaoyi Chen to come along?" Gong Jie's face twitched when he heard this. No need. Huh? Why? Didn't he usually dote on his two nephews? Since they were going to fly a kite, wouldn't it be more interesting to bring you and Xiaoyi Chen along? However, Gong Jie didn't think so. He could only imagine the two little fellows snickering at him and whispering to each other. I didn't expect that uncle would still play with such childish things even though he's already an adult. That's right. Flying a kite is so childish, as expected of the chief commander of the hurricane group. The commander in charge of kiting? Ha 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 ha. The thought of those two infuriating faces infuriated Gong Jie. There's no need to specially bring those two little fellows. There will be another chance next time. He didn't want to be mocked by these two brats. Noticing the awkwardness on Gong Jie's face, Hua Jin actually guessed what he was worried about. He probed half-jokingly, "Don't tell me that you're too burdened with the image of an idol, so you're worried that the two lads will laugh at you if they see you flying a kite and you fail." His words exposed the truth. Gong Jie coldly glared at Hua Jin. The temperature in the car dropped by a few degrees Celsius. The latter immediately shut his mouth and didn't dare to say another word. He was worried that he would upset the big devil and lose his temper on the spot. After thinking about it, he felt that he had to explain himself. Actually, I don't think it's a big deal to fly a kite with the children. When you have a son or daughter in the future, you might even have to do homework and do handicrafts with them. Isn't that even more childish? Natalia, who was beside him, was stunned. Chapter 4270. Just as Hua Jin had said, there would be a day sooner or later when the Gong Jie would fall in love with a woman. Then, the two of them would get married and have a child. That child would have the blood of the Gong Jie flowing in his veins. He would be her biological child. But she wasn't. If there was such a day, then, would that child replace her and receive all the love and affection of the Gong Jie? And she? But it was nothing. Suddenly, Natalia was a little envious of that child. Even though the child wasn't born yet and only existed in an abstract sense, just thinking about it made her feel envious. She thought that the child of the Gong Jie must be the luckiest child in the world. She had such a handsome father who loved her so much. She was afraid that she would never have such a bond of blood in her life again. Thinking of this, Natalia's gaze suddenly looked a little lonely. When Hua Jin looked at her, she immediately curled her lips and smiled to hide it. Hua Jin was a meticulous person. Through Natalia's smile, he could see her loneliness and disappointment. He immediately realized that his words just now had probably caused her to have some bad associations. She probably thought that one day, when the Gong Jie really fell in love with a wife, got married, and had a child, he would definitely give all his love to the child and not to her. But if Natalia didn't say it, he couldn't say it either. Otherwise, it would be too deliberate. Just as he was feeling conflicted, Natalia looked at Hua Jin curiously and asked, "Will you get married in the future?" You will definitely find a woman you like in the future and get married. Then, like Daddy, you will get married and have a child, right? When Hua Jin heard this, he immediately confirmed his guess. Just as expected. She was really worried about this. "I won't get married." Hua Jin chuckled and immediately said, "I won't get married." She had been mentally prepared for Hua Jin to say that he would get married. But when she heard such an answer from him, Natalia was even more surprised. "Why?" "Because," Hua Jin said seriously, "I don't want to get married." "Why not?" "Because I already have you." Natalia didn't expect such an answer from him. She was stunned and looked at him in surprise. "Do you plan to spend the rest of your life alone? To die alone?" He was not destined to be alone for the rest of his life. "What do you mean by dying alone? Don't I already have you?" Hua Jin patted her head lovingly. "In the future, no matter what happens, you and I will be together forever. We will never be separated." When Natalia heard this, her heart was deeply touched. Her eyes reddened, but she held back her tears and nodded heavily. "Yes, I will study hard and earn money in the future to support you in your old age. Perhaps for Natalia, not getting married for the rest of her life was not a clear concept, but it was enough to shock her. However, retirement. Hua Jin immediately imagined himself paralyzed in a wheelchair while Natalia was all grown up and busy beside him. Oh my God, this little rascal, he hadn't even grown up yet, but he could already imagine what she would look like when she was old. Was this filial piety? Should he symbolically feel touched? Chapter 42-71. Natalia threw herself into his arms and said seriously, I've decided to love you more from now on. After all, you're the man who's going to be with me for the rest of my life. When Hua Jin heard this, he was overjoyed. Although he pretended to be calm on the surface, the corners of his mouth couldn't hide his delight. You've finally realized the truth. Hua Jin hugged Natalia lovingly and raised his handsome eyebrows. I'm the man who's going to be with you for the rest of your life. When Gong Jie heard this, he didn't think much of it and said unhappily, Why should I? Natalia and Hua Jin looked back at him in surprise. You didn't even ask me. How do you know that I'll definitely get married and have children in the future? When Natalia heard this, she didn't quite believe him. Don't tell me you don't want to get married and have children? I don't have such thoughts. Why? Natalia suddenly threw out a shocking sentence. Don't tell me you like men? Gong Jie was speechless. Hua Jin was speechless. After Natalia asked this question, before Gong Jie could react, Hua Jin's face turned red. He immediately muttered, Don't talk nonsense. Gong Jie glanced at Hua Jin meaningfully and couldn't help but laugh. Why are you blushing? Hua Jin instinctively touched his face and looked at the phone screen. Is my face red? When he turned around, he saw Natalia nodding sincerely. Yeah, it's very red. Hua Jin immediately found an excuse. It's probably because the sun outside is too strong. It's red. Then, there was dead silence in the car. The car drove towards the outskirts. Half an hour later, the car arrived at Forest Park on Stone Horse Mountain. Outside Forest Ridge Park, there was a large lawn. On weekends and holidays, many people would bring their children and call their friends over to fly kites. However, coincidentally, it wasn't a weekend or a holiday. Instead of the busy holiday season, there were only a few kites on the lawn. The bodyguard got out of the car and stood by. Hua Jin carried the basket of snacks to a spacious lawn and laid out the tablecloth on the lawn. The fruits were all washed. Hua Jin took Natalia's favorite snacks and placed them casually on the lawn. However, when Natalia reached the lawn, she was unusually excited. She looked around and ran around to check the area. When she came back, she reported to Gong Jie that she had found a suitable place to fly kites. There are more people there. Everyone is standing there to fly kites. Gong Jie nodded. He picked up the kite that Hua Jin had arranged and was about to walk over with Natalia. When Hua Jin saw this, he immediately stood up and said, No, don't fly it in a crowded place. Huh? Why? Because if there are too many people, the kites will be too close together and the strings will get tangled. If that happens, the kite will fall easily and the string will be knotted. This time, he only brought 3 reels of string. If it was to be knotted, he didn't have many spare ones. As he spoke, a kite fell and landed on Hua Jin's back. The two of them ran over noisily. Ah, the string got tangled. Chapter 42-72. Hua Jin turned to Natalia and Gong Jie with an expression that seemed to say, See, I'm right. Natalia nodded with a confused expression. You seem to know a lot. Didn't you say you didn't fly kites before? I didn't fly kites, but I did a lot of research. Hua Jin had done a lot of research. He usually didn't fly kites. Furthermore, it was rare for him to go out with Natalia, so he didn't want to fail. Thus, Natalia and Gong Jie chose a more spacious area that was far away from the dense cluster of kites. Although there weren't many people at this time, the people who came to fly kites were all gathered together. Therefore, that part of the sky was filled with a dazzling array of kites of various colors and styles. They were all gathered together in a dark mass. The spectacular scene was breathtaking. Daddy, let's go fly kites. Okay. Gong Jie picked up 2 kites. Which one should we fly first? Natalia stared at the 2 kites in Gong Jie's hands. One was Peppa Pig and the other was Dubai. After hesitating for a long time, she chose Dubai first. Let's fly this one first. Gong Jie and Hua Jin were both surprised. Huh? Why Dubai? Don't you like Peppa Pig the most? I'll use Dubai as a practice target. If I don't fly it properly and it flies away, I still have Peppa Pig. Natalia was quite selfish. Hua Jin was full of resentment. Dubai was his favorite kite. However, Hua Jin still chose to compromise in front of his precious daughter. Don't worry, I'll take good care of Dubai. Saying this, Natalia picked up Dubai's kite and ran toward a spacious area. Slow down. Gong Jie chased after her. Do you know how to fly it? I do. Saying this, Natalia ran off into the distance. Hua Jin smiled helplessly and stayed where he was, guarding the luggage. Natalia didn't know how to fly a kite, but she was very competitive. Gong Jie had said that he would teach her, but Natalia had mercilessly exposed him. You won't release it either, right? I've seen others fly kites. I know how to do it. Saying this, Natalia raised Dubai high up in the air, and her 2 little legs began to run like a motor. However, the way she was flying the kite was a little inappropriate. Today's weather was very good. It was sunny and there was nothing on the lawn, so the wind was very strong. Natalia's method was usually used when there was no wind. She ran and created wind to blow the kite up. But now that there was wind, her method was not suitable. When she ran, the kite was about to fly up in the wind. She was not tall and thin, so in the blink of an eye, she was hung on the ground by the wind. Wah! Natalia got to her feet and pouted with a long face. Seeing that she had fallen, Gong Jie hurriedly ran over to her side and squatted down nervously. How are you feeling? Does it hurt? A little. Let me see. Gong Jie carefully held up her knees. He saw that her knees were red from the friction on the lawn and a layer of skin had been scraped off. Does it hurt? Natalia replied softly. It doesn't hurt. It's just burning. It's a little scraped off, but there's no blood. Chapter 4273. Gong Jie blew on her knuckles and glared at her. I told you I was going to teach you. You didn't want to listen, huh? She insisted on being stubborn. Now that she had fallen, she insisted that it didn't hurt. Although there was no blood, it was still a layer of skin. She wasn't made of steel. How could it not hurt? His heart ached for her. I'm really fine. I can still walk. As she spoke, Natalia climbed up from the ground. Although her knee was burning with pain, she could endure it. How could she show any pain? Otherwise, Gong Jie would definitely let her rest for a while and not let her fly the kite anymore. The kite hadn't been flown yet. She didn't want to rest. Do you want to continue? Of course. Natalia reached out to pick up the kite, but Gong Jie picked it up first. You're not allowed to touch it. Oh. Natalia looked at him suspiciously. I'll teach you how to fly the kite first. Then you can fly your page, okay? Okay. Although she was unwilling, Natalia nodded in agreement. She was feeling excited at this moment, but she could only watch helplessly from the side. She was a little indignant, but the man could also sense her impatience. So he said, watch carefully. Let's see who will put it higher later. It had to be said that the man's words had ignited Natalia's fighting spirit. Although Natalia was a little girl, she had a strong desire to win. When she heard that they were going to compete to see who could fly higher, she was instantly energized and filled with fighting spirit. Gong Jie picked up the kite. As he was tall, when he lifted the kite, the wind blew the kite up. He threw the kite like a paper airplane. Then he let go of the reel and took a step back, gently tugging on the reel from time to time. The wind blew the kite higher and higher. Although Gong Jie didn't have the skills to fly a kite, he thought that the kite would probably fly as far as a paper airplane. He had studied engineering, so a game like kite flying was child's play to him. The kite took off smoothly. In his hands, it was as obedient as an old eagle that had undergone strict training. He knew how to use the wind very well. If the kite showed signs of weakness in the air, he would tighten the reel and give it a gentle pull. If he felt that the string was starting to tighten, it meant that the wind was blowing. Thus, when the wind came, he let go of the string and let the wind blow the kite higher and higher. Unknowingly, the reel had loosened by half, and the kite was flying higher and higher. Even with the naked eye, it seemed to have surpassed all the other kites on the lawn. Eh? Why are those kites not as high as you? Natalia's eyes sparkled. Daddy, you're amazing. Hua Jin suddenly walked over and overheard their conversation. He said disapprovingly, their line isn't as long as ours. Their line has already reached the bottom. Look at the height, it's no more than 400 meters. The line I brought can reach up to 800 meters. 800 meters! Well, actually, the kite string is 1,000 meters long, but any higher and the kite string will break easily. Natalia nodded, half understanding. Oh, I get it. So our kite is over 400 meters now, right? There's a mark on the line. Chapter 4274. Hua Jin walked over to take a closer look. There was a tick mark on the line, indicating that the kite had already flown up to 500 meters. How much effort had it taken to successfully fly the kite up to 500 meters? He claimed that he had no kite flying experience. Who was he kidding? It's fun. Gong Jie suddenly felt that kite flying was quite interesting, especially when he caught a glimpse of Natalia, who was beside him, looking at him with admiration. This made him feel that this activity could not be more interesting. Natalia felt a little guilty. Just now, she had been eyeing Gong Jie covetously, determined to compete with him. Now, seeing him fly so high, she suddenly felt a little discouraged. I lost, she said angrily. I definitely can't win against Daddy. When Gong Jie heard this, he smiled disapprovingly. You're giving up just like that? When she heard that, Natalia immediately retorted stubbornly. Who said that I'm giving up? I haven't said that I'm giving up yet. Hua Jin immediately said, Natalia, let's go fly Peppa Pig. Okay? Okay. Natalia clenched her little fists. I must fly higher than Daddy. Okay. You're not allowed to help. I want to fly it myself. Okay. Hua Jin smiled as he watched Natalia walk to the makeup table. She grabbed the kite and string from Peppa Pig and studied it for a while. Finally, she returned to Hua Jin's side dejectedly. How do I tie the kite string? Didn't she say that she would do it herself and that she did not need help? Hua Jin gave her a look of disdain. Natalia could not ignore the ridicule in his eyes. She immediately defended herself seriously. Tying the string. It's just tying the string. It's not considered helping. Oh right. If you say it's not counted, then it's not counted. Hua Jin did not know whether to laugh or cry. He squatted down and placed the kite on the ground. He threaded the string back and forth with both hands and quickly tied the string. Gong Jie watched the entire process and suddenly smiled. I couldn't tell that you're quite clever with your hands. I was the one who tied your kite. You're really amazing, he said casually. It was unknown if he was sincerely praising her. Hua Jin felt uncomfortable listening to it. He fixed the string and handed the kite to Natalia. He patted her head gently. Go! Yes. Natalia lifted the kite and flew it in the same way her brother had done earlier. Alas, she was short, which was quite a disadvantage. No matter how she tiptoed, there was still a height difference between her and her brother. She turned to Hua Jin and said, Stand a little to the side. Don't block my wind. Hua Jin had a face full of question marks. How could he block her attack with his body? However, he still obediently retreated to the side. Natalia threw the kite, but it crashed into the grass like a plane. Duong. Natalia's face darkened immediately. She looked resentfully at the kite in Gong Jie's hand that was flying higher and higher. She complained, We're different. Ha 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 ha. Hua Jin could not hold it in anymore. He was not afraid of offending Natalia and laughed mercilessly. Natalia, you're too cute. You didn't throw the kite on the ground. You threw it into the wind. Natalia's face continued to darken. Stop laughing. Hua Jin tried his best to hold it in. His face was red from holding it in. Let me help you, okay? Chapter 4275. Alright, you play by yourself. Hua Jin saw that Natalia insisted on playing by herself, so he walked to the side and sat on the ground. He watched as Natalia ran around with the kite in her hand. The kite in Gong Jie's hand was already very high, and it was getting higher and higher. Coupled with the cute design of the kite and the exquisite workmanship, it attracted the attention of the other kite flyers on the lawn. Dad, look, that kite is so high. Brother, I want to fly it that high too. No, we have reached the end of the rope. This is the highest we can fly. Then how can he fly his kite so high? That means he bought the rope for a long time. That Dubai is so cute. Why is our kite so ugly? If there was no comparison, there would be no harm. As the saying goes, you get what you pay for. This saying was not wrong. Other people's kites were bought from supermarkets. Most of them were tourists from Senling Park. When they came out of the park, they saw someone pushing a cart selling kites on the lawn. So they went up and bought a kite to fly. Hua Jin's kite, however, was bought from Leji Holdings' flagship store. Apart from being able to fly like an ordinary kite, it was also equipped with an AI system. Furthermore, its workmanship was solid, which meant that no matter how high it flew or how strong the wind was, it would not break. Gradually, Gong Jie noticed that there were a lot of people around him. Parents were holding their children's hands. There were also a few young girls and boys around him. However, they were all looking at him differently. The children were envious of the kite in his hand. Could fly so high. Then they looked at the kite that he had picked up with a broken string. The young girls, on the other hand, were looking at Gong Jie with mesmerized eyes. They did not move an inch away from him. Blue sky, white clouds, green grass, and this handsome man. Gong Jie's appearance had, without a doubt, attracted a lot of attention. Quick, look, the guy flying the kite is so handsome. This is the first time I've seen such a handsome man in real life. Is he an internet celebrity? Or a celebrity? He's so tall. Could he be a model? His features are so sharp. He doesn't look like a celebrity. It's a pity that he's not a celebrity. Hua Jin saw that more and more people were gathering around. He immediately picked up the mask and put it on, for fear that others would recognize him as Hua Jin. Although he had already retired, his fan base was still very popular. Therefore, he had to be careful every time he went out. Hua Jin's popularity in the country was very high. He had acted in several phenomenal TV series, especially with Lethal Beauty. His popularity had reached a new level. In daily life, many people knew him. Actually, he didn't have many fans, but people had a herd mentality. As long as it was a celebrity, whether they knew him or not, they would surround him and ask for a photo. Fortunately, Gong Jie attracted most of the attention, so not many people noticed him. Hua Jin wore a mask and hid on the other side. After a while, the crowd grew larger and larger. Gong Jie came back to his senses and realized that he had been surrounded by a group of starry-eyed women. Handsome, where did you buy your kite? Chapter 4276. How did you manage to fly your kite so high? I can't fly my kite high enough, and it always falls down for no reason. Cutie, can you teach me how to fly a kite? A group of women surrounded Gong Jie and chattered away. Some even tried to seduce him, and some even took out their phones to open WeChat's QR code, wanting to add Gong Jie as a friend. In front of such a handsome man, many of the women couldn't care less about their modesty. They blushed and mustered up their courage to strike up a conversation. Gong Jie was confused. He had been too focused on flying the kite earlier and hadn't paid attention to the women around him. He didn't know when, but he had been drowned by the sea of people. Natalia finally managed to fly the kite, and from the corner of her eye, she saw that there was a crowd of people dozens of meters away from Gong Jie. Gong Jie held the kite string in his hand, but he couldn't break through the crowd. She saw that the women were all rubbing their hands, eager to strike up a conversation with Gong Jie. Although she was still young, she knew that her daddy was being targeted by other women. With this heroic silhouette that was rarely seen in the secular world, it attracted bees and butterflies. However, Natalia couldn't allow Gong Jie to be coveted by others. She pursed her lips, thought for a moment, and walked toward Gong Jie with the kite in her hand. First, she was blocked out of the crowd. Natalia held the kite up high and pouted. "Daddy! Daddy!" She carefully tried to break through the crowd. "Excuse me, why are you all squeezing here? Daddy! Daddy!" Hearing Natalia call for Daddy, the people around her noticed the little girl and were surprised. Oh my God! This little girl was so cute. Some sharp-eyed people even noticed Natalia's purple eyes and were shocked. Why are this girl's eyes purple? Could it be that she's wearing contact lenses? That's right. How can there be purple eyes in this world? Whose child is this? Her parents are too much. She's so young, but they put purple contact lenses on her. That's too much. What if her eyes get damaged? She seems to be calling someone daddy. Who is it? Whose child is that? Come and claim it. This child is so small. Be careful. Don't squeeze her. Don't step on her. The crowd began to spread the word. Gong Jie immediately fixed the reel to the hook on the ground and walked over to Natalia. "Excuse me." As he walked over, the crowd automatically parted to make a path for him. When Natalia saw him, she threw herself into his arms and sobbed in a voice that she had never used before. "Daddy, sob, sob, sob. Why can't I fly my kite? I'm so angry." Gong Jie had never seen Natalia act so coquettishly. She threw herself into his arms and opened her arms for a hug. He obediently picked her up, which was equivalent to admitting that he was Natalia's father. At this moment, the expressions of the people around them changed. Shock, astonishment, disbelief. Especially when they saw the little girl hugging Gong Jie and calling him daddy, they were even more shocked. What? This little brother was already a father. He looked so young, like he was in his 20s, but he was already a father? Chapter 4277. Many of the girls were heartbroken. Such a handsome young man was already married and had children, and they were still pitiful single dogs. Sure enough, diamond men nowadays were either married or gay. High-quality men had already settled down and started their own careers. Many of their faces were filled with disappointment. Seeing that her plan had succeeded, Natalia chuckled to herself. She gently wrapped her arms around Gong Jie's neck and gave him a peck on the cheek. The people around them exclaimed in surprise again, as well as looks of envy and jealousy. "Ah, I'm so envious. I'm suddenly so envious of that little girl. Yeah, if only I was the girl in that young man's arms. Why don't I have such a handsome father? This little girl is really good at reincarnating. I have to say, reincarnation is also a skill." The crowd surrounded Gong Jie and Natalia and discussed animatedly. Their gazes were filled with surprise, jealousy, and amazement. The noisy chatter of the people around them made Gong Jie frown. He turned around and glanced around coldly. Then, he shouted expressionlessly, "What are you all doing here?" So fierce, especially Gong Jie's cold and distant gaze. It felt as if a gust of cold wind from the Arctic Ocean had blown over the huge lawn. Not a single blade of grass grew. The crowd was shivering from the cold. Soon they dispersed like floodwaters. There was not a single person around. Seeing that everyone had left, Natalia felt a little better. She did not like the feeling of Gong Jie being stared at like an animal in a zoo. She always felt that those gazes were disgusting. What she did not expect, though, was that a single look from the man was enough to scare this group of people into scattering like birds and beasts. Hua Jin took off his mask and widened his eyes in shock. See, it really was not his fault. Gong Jie's piercing glare was enough to make anyone afraid. However, he was indeed the devil. Just one gaze was enough to scare off so many people and make them flee. This showed how terrifying Gong Jie's aura was. Humph. Those women actually dare to covet my daddy. Too much. Natalia hugged his shoulder and said angrily, "Daddy is mine. No one can take him away from me." Humph. When Gong Jie heard this, his furrowed brows finally relaxed slightly. However, he pretended to be calm as he pinched her cheek and asked with raised brows, "Didn't someone say before that she should love other men more in the future? Why has her attitude changed so much now?" Hua Jin gulped. She didn't expect that this guy was still brooding over what she said in the car just now. She was too petty. How could she be so calculative over a child's words? Natalia, however, disagreed. Who said that? You were the one who said it. Natalia pouted but refused to admit it. She pouted and said, I didn't say that. I think it's very important. Then, if he and I fall into the river at the same time, who will you save first? The corners of Hua Jin's lips twitched when he heard that. Why would such a cold and aloof great demon king ask such a childish question? When Natalia heard this, she frowned and asked him an even more difficult question. If I fall into a cesspool, will you save me and give me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? Gong Jie was speechless. Chapter 4278. Gong Jie was momentarily at a loss for words. He didn't know how to answer this question. Where did this clever girl come up with this question? He didn't even know how to answer this question. Just by hearing this question, the strong image in his mind was about to come to life. Ha ha ha! Hua Jin couldn't hold it in any longer and burst out laughing. This rhetorical question was perfect. It was an interrogation of the soul. Natalia raised her eyebrows proudly and pressed on. You're not willing to save me? I'm willing. Then are you willing to give me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation? Gong Jie frowned. He had always had a serious obsession with cleanliness, so just imagining that scene made him feel nauseous. He put Natalia down with an ashen face. It was obvious that something was wrong with his expression. You're not allowed to ask this question in the future. Natalia was puzzled when she heard this. Why? This isn't a question a lady should ask. As Gong Jie spoke, he frowned and asked in return, Where did you hear this question from? I'm not telling you. Natalia stuck out her tongue playfully at him and ran toward Hua Jin. Seeing her run toward Hua Jin, Gong Jie's meaningful gaze fell on Hua Jin. Naturally, he would think that this person had probably instilled this question in her. When Hua Jin met his gaze, he couldn't help but shudder. He wanted to explain, but he also felt that if he forced himself to explain, it would make it seem like he was trying to hide something, or it would make it seem like he was trying to hide something. But he really wasn't the one who had instilled this question in her. Hua Jin tugged at Natalia's little hand and asked seriously, Who did you learn this question from? Does it matter who I learned it from? You can't answer it anyway. That means that if I really fell into a cesspool, you won't save me and give me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I will. Hua Jin clenched his fists and vowed solemnly. This time, it was Natalia's turn to stare at him as though she had seen a ghost. He said he was willing. Why couldn't she believe it? I don't believe it. Hua Jin said lightly. It's right that you don't believe it. I also don't believe that you would really fall into a cesspool. Natalia was dumbfounded. Even though this sounded like the truth and she didn't really have the chance to fall into the cesspool, this question theoretically didn't exist. Then, there was no such thing as whether she was willing or not. However, Hua Jin's answer was suspicious of being lazy. This time, it was Gong Jie's turn to feel better. Hua Jin was able to restrain this little fellow with just one sentence. He had a whole new level of respect for him now. Upon hearing this, Natalia immediately turned around and said to her brother, I can answer your question now. I will also jump into the river to accompany you, to die for love. Gong Jie and Hua Jin were both dumbfounded. What kind of answer was this? Anyway, you won't really fall into the river. Moreover, even if you really fall into the river, I won't be able to drag you. However, I don't ask to be born in the same year, month, and day, but I will definitely die in the same year, month, and day. Hua Jin and Gong Jie were completely stunned. This answer was really too perfunctory. Chapter 4279. Natalia giggled and said, All right, let's not dwell on such a pointless topic. You are all very important to me. I can't give up on any of you. Pointless topic. Hua Jin chuckled and glanced at Gong Jie. However, he saw him turn away expressionlessly with a strange expression on his face. Just like that, Hua Jin accompanied Natalia as she flew the kite for a while. Finally, the kite was in the air and the wind was getting stronger. However, Natalia didn't look too happy as she looked at the kite flying in the sky. Hua Jin saw that she looked a little lost and couldn't help but lean over to ask, What's wrong? You look unhappy. Natalia pouted and looked at him. She sighed emotionally and said, I miss you. Hua Jin was stunned for a moment when he heard that. He couldn't help but laugh. Wanting to tease her, he asked tentatively, You? Don't tell me you like you? Of course I like you. Natalia obviously didn't catch the hidden meaning in Hua Jin's eyes. Her gaze was so pure that when Hua Jin looked into her eyes, he felt that his thoughts were too sinful. Actually, the mutual love between children was really very simple. The attraction of opposites also existed between children. However, it was very difficult for such a young child to understand what love was in the adult world. She also couldn't understand those complicated feelings. Liking a boy or a girl was purely because he was good-looking and she was pretty. They liked to play with each other. It was that simple. Natalia seemed to be a little dependent on Yu. This dependence was no less than her dependence on Gongjie. Hua Jin said, Why don't we go to Yu's house after we're done flying the kite? What do you think? Natalia's eyes lit up and she became much more energetic. Okay, you play here first. I'll go get my phone and give you a call. All right. Hua Jin walked to the side, took out his phone, and found Yun Shishir's number. Gongjie had just put away the kite when he saw that he seemed to be on the phone. He asked suspiciously, Who are you calling? Hua Jin said casually, Oh, I called Shishir. Natalia said that she wanted to play with Yu. Since you rarely come back, why don't we have dinner together? When Gongjie heard this, he nodded. Okay. Hua Jin dialed the number. After a long silence, the call finally went through. The person on the other end of the line spoke, but it was Xiao Yichen's low and trembling voice. Hello? Hua Jin stared blankly for a moment and asked curiously, Why are you answering the phone? Where's your mommy? The other side was silent for a while. What Xiao Yichen said next made Hua Jin's eyelids twitch violently. Mommy! Something happened. Hearing this, Hua Jin's eyes widened in shock. He sucked in a breath of cold air and held his breath. Beside him, Gongjie noticed the strange reaction on his face and frowned slightly. Finally, Hua Jin came back to his senses with difficulty and immediately asked anxiously, What happened? It's very complicated. Anyway, come to the hospital first. With that, Xiao Yichen hurriedly hung up the phone. When Hua Jin heard the busy tone on the other end of the line, he held the phone in a daze. Gongjie walked over and asked solemnly, What happened? Shishir. Something happened. Chapter 4280. At the mention of Yun Shishir, Gongjie instantly tensed up. His breath caught in his throat as he walked up to Hua Jin and gripped his shoulders tightly. What happened? Gongjie was very strong and Hua Jin was in pain. However, he knew that Gongjie was too concerned and worried. Therefore, he endured the pain and calmed himself down. He comforted him and said, Gongjie, calm down. I don't know what happened. Anyway, let's go to the hospital first. From Xiao Yichen's tone, it shouldn't be life-threatening. When Gongjie heard that Hua Jin's life wasn't in danger, the tense muscles on his face relaxed a little. However, his fingertips were still trembling slightly. Hua Jin turned around and instructed Natalia to keep the kite. When Natalia heard that, she was a little surprised and said that she wanted to play with it for a while more. It wasn't until Hua Jin said that he had something to deal with that Natalia realized that something urgent must have happened when she saw his serious expression. She carefully asked, Then, can we still play with you tonight? I'm afraid not today. I'm sorry, Natalia. Can we do it another day? Hua Jin's attitude was sincere. When Natalia heard this, she looked disappointed but considerately told him that it was okay. It was obvious that something serious must have happened. Natalia wasn't a willful child. They quickly kept the kite, got into the car, and drove as fast as lightning. First, they sent Natalia home. Then, Gongjie and Hua Jin rushed to the hospital according to the location that Xiao Yichen had given them. 20 minutes later, the two of them finally arrived at the hospital. When they walked to the door of the ward, they saw Xiao Yichen and Mu Yaja sitting outside. Gongjie hurriedly walked over and looked at Xiao Yichen. Then, he looked at Mu Yaja, who had a serious expression on his face. His heart sank. What's going on? What's going on? When Mu Yaja and Xiao Chen heard hurried footsteps, they looked up and saw Hua Jin and Gong Jie rushing over. Mu Yaja stood up. Just as he was about to say something, he turned around worriedly and glanced through the window. Through the transparent glass of the window, he could see a few doctors surrounding Yun Shishir in the ward. They were whispering to each other, but he couldn't hear what they were talking about through the glass. The nurse was cleaning Yun Shishir's wounds. Gong Jie's face turned pale when he saw the blood-stained cotton balls on the tray. What's going on? Xiao Chen, on the other hand, had a solemn expression on his face. He lowered his head in silence, looking exhausted. Gong Jie didn't expect to get any information from Xiao Chen, so he turned to look at Mu Yaja. Mu Yaja said slowly, "She was stabbed in the abdomen. The doctor said that the injury isn't serious. She's receiving a blood transfusion now." She was stabbed? Gong Jie was furious when he heard that. Who stabbed her? Hua Jin was also in disbelief when he heard that Yun Shishir had been stabbed. How did she get stabbed out of nowhere? Yun Shishir was usually followed by bodyguards from afar whenever she went out. How could Yun Shishir get hurt? Gong Jie was still upset that Mu Yaja didn't protect her well. However, what Mu Yaja said next made Gong Jie and Hua Jin fall into a daze again. Mu Yaja said, "Gong Fan was the one who stabbed her. No one expected it." Chapter 4281. How is that possible? Hua Jin was the first to be suspicious. Why did Gong Fan stab Shishir? Mu Yaja lifted his head and glanced at him. His handsome brows were slightly furrowed and his eyes were filled with confusion. This had happened in the afternoon. In the morning, he had left the ward to go to the office because he had some matters to attend to. When he returned, he saw Yun Shishir sitting in front of Gong Fan's bed and peeling an apple for him. Seeing that Gong Fan was still unconscious, he went to the bathroom to take a shower. However, just as he was about to wash the dishes, he heard a strange noise coming from the ward. Then he heard Xiao Chen scream. He didn't have time to dry himself. He put on a bathrobe and rushed out, only to see Yun Shishir clutching her abdomen. Her body was bent over and she was kneeling on the floor. There was a horrifying pool of blood under her knees. Gong Fan stood by the side and looked at Yun Shishir coldly. He was holding a fruit knife in his hand that was still stained with Yun Shishir's blood. He was holding the knife so tightly that it seemed like he was going to break the handle. A fruit knife like this would stay in a person's body because of the suction force of the flesh. If one didn't have enough strength, it would be difficult to pull it out. It was obvious that Gong Fan had pulled the knife out after stabbing Yun Shishir once. Seeing that he had raised the fruit knife and was about to stab Yun Shishir again, Xiao Chen heard the commotion and rushed over in time to protect Yun Shishir. Until now, Xiao Chen still had a lingering fear. He didn't dare to imagine what would have happened if he had left the ward to get the hot water. No one could have predicted what would have happened. In any case, Xiao Chen was really scared out of his wits and still hadn't recovered from the shock. Mu Yaja carried Yun Shishir and rushed her to the emergency room. Xiao Chen stayed behind to look after Gong Fan. When Yun Shishir was sent to the emergency room and the doctor came out to report that her life wasn't in danger, Mu Yaja returned to the ward. By then, Gong Fan had already fainted and the entire ward was heavily guarded by Mu Yaja. Fortunately, Mu Yaja didn't panic. This incident hadn't spread yet. Other than Mu Yaja and Xiao Chen, no one else knew how Yun Shishir got injured out of the blue. Because it happened in the hospital wanted to investigate the matter. However, because the victim was Mu Yaja's wife, the hospital didn't dare to investigate further. They only asked a few questions and Mu Yaja gave a perfunctory reply. After that, they didn't dare to say anything else. They only saved her while trembling in fear and didn't dare to interfere anymore. Gong Fan's ward had been sealed by Mu Yaja's men. In the huge ward, there were only a few trustworthy nurses and doctors. The rest of the people were Yu Yu's personal bodyguards. Mu Yaja still didn't have the energy to care about Yun Shishir and didn't know his motive for stabbing Yun Shishir. However, according to Xiao Chen, if he hadn't stopped him, Gong Fan would have stabbed Yun Shishir to death. He couldn't understand what kind of deep hatred made Gong Fan insist on stabbing Yun Shirshir to death. That was murder. Gong Fan was crazy. Why did he do that? This was no longer an injury, but simply an attempt to kill him. Gong Fan wanted to kill Yun Shirshir. Xiao Chen was filled with anger at the thought of Gong Fan's ruthlessness. Chapter 4282. Now Yun Shirshir had yet to wake up. No one knew what had happened at that time. He was an adult and had the ability to reason that Xiao Chen, a child, did not have. Gong Fan was not stupid. On the contrary, his personality was more shrewd than Yu Yu's. Why would he do something that was disadvantageous to him? What good would it do him to kill Yun Shirshir? Mu Yaja could not understand this logic. Hence, he told Xiao Chen not to think so much for the time being. Perhaps when Gong Fan woke up, the truth would be revealed. Compared to Xiao Chen's impulsiveness, Gong Jie was much more rational. Impossible. He furrowed his eyebrows, unwilling to believe it. No matter what happened, I will not believe that Gong Fan would hurt Yun Shirshir. When Xiao Chen heard this, he stood up angrily. He restrained himself and said unhappily, I saw it with my own eyes. Gong Fan held a knife and stabbed Mommy. I saw it with my own eyes. How could it be wrong? He used to like Gong Fan very much, but this did not mean that he could tolerate Gong Fan hurting Yun Shirshir. However, Gong Jie thought in a different direction. Gong Jie knew very well what Yun Shirshir represented to Gong Fan. This was Gong Fan's warmest obsession in this world. Yun Shirshir was as important to Gong Fan as she was to Xiao Chen and Yu Yu. To Gong Fan, Yun Shirshir's existence was more like a lighthouse. How could he hurt the lighthouse in his heart? Although Gong Jie's heart ached that Yun Shirshir was injured, this matter could not be concluded just by seeing it with his own eyes. Hua Jin immediately comforted him. Xiao Chen, calm down and be rational. I'm already very rational. If it wasn't for Yu Yu's body, I would have broken his hand. Xiao Chen gritted his teeth. It was obvious that he had been holding it in for a long time. Sometimes what you see may not be true, so don't make the final decision. Wait for your mommy to wake up and ask about the cause and effect of this matter. Gong Jie looked at Mu Yaja and asked, Have you told Alice about this matter? No. Mu Yaja shook his head. From the beginning of the incident until now, they did not give anyone a chance to breathe. After they sent Yun Shirshir to the emergency room, they came back to make arrangements for Gong Fan to arrange things. After Yun Shirshir to be sent to the hospital, to Tu's to make arrangements. It's better to tell her about this matter. Mu Yaja made an excuse. He did not want Alice to be involved in this matter for the time being. At the very least, he had to wait for Yun Shirshir and Gong Fan to wake up first. No one could say for sure what had happened at that time. Even Xiao Chen was a later matter. No one could say for sure why Gong Fan wanted to stab Yun Shirshir. After a while, the doctor and nurse walked out. Mu Yaja immediately stood up and asked about the situation. It's nothing serious. The wound is not deep. Chapter 4283. Xiao Chen was silent for a while. Suddenly, he punched the long bench hard. A creaking sound was heard, and the surface of the bench was slightly damaged. Gong Fan wants to replace Yu Yu? Dream on. If not for the fact that Yu Yu pitied him and didn't want him to disappear and was willing to coexist with him, with Yu Yu's ability, he would definitely be able to completely destroy his personality. Now, he actually treated Mommy and Yu Yu like this. He's a devil. When he thought of the bloody scene that Xiao Chen had witnessed, his heart throbbed with pain. He could never bear for anyone to hurt Yun Shirshir. Therefore, he could never forgive Gong Fan. I won't forgive him. Xiao Chen gritted his teeth and said, Never. When Gong Fan woke up, he had a terrible headache. He held his forehead, not knowing what had happened. However, his memory was still stuck on the night before. He vaguely remembered that at night, because of the stomachache, he randomly found painkillers in the drawer. He didn't care about the dosage and took 4 or 5 pills in one go. After that, he didn't expect that not only did it not work, but his whole body started to spin and it started to become difficult to breathe. He curled up on the bed, thinking that it was a side effect of taking the painkillers. He wanted to endure it and get through it. In the end, he couldn't get through it. When he regained some consciousness, he was already in the hospital. In the resuscitation room, while he was in a daze, he felt the doctor continuously moving a tube into his throat. It was painful. When the tube went in, Gong Fan shuddered and spat out everything in his stomach. He wanted to bend over, but the doctor forced him to stay still. At that time, the doctor compared him to those who were seeking death. Those who came to the hospital to have their stomachs pumped were children under the age of 3 who had eaten by mistake. However, those above the age of 8 who came were basically suicidal and had taken sleeping pills or pesticides. Therefore, the doctors and nurses thought that Gong Fan was also trying to die. When they saw that he was about to sit up, they nervously surrounded him and held him down tightly. Under such torture, his consciousness became clearer and clearer. There was water all over the bed, and it was hard to tell what was from the gastric lavage and what was vomited out. He felt like a fish on a chopping board waiting to be slaughtered. He struggled in pain, feeling the baptism of the doctors' and nurses' cold gazes. By the time the gastric lavage was over, Gong Fan was already exhausted. Immediately after, the nurse inserted a needle into his wrist, and after that, he lost consciousness. That was probably the effect of the sedative. He began to have nightmares. In the nightmares, he seemed to be floating in the sky, and below him was his body lying quietly on the hospital bed, motionless. His face was as white as wax, without any signs of life or blood. Beside the bed, Yun Shirshir sat on a small stool and was carefully peeling the apple for him with a fruit knife. She also carefully cut the apple into pieces. Gong Fan did not know what had happened. He only felt that the person on the bed had sat up. He was shocked and did not understand what was going on. He even suspected that his personality had been exiled and was no longer in his body. His body actually started to move on its own. Was he dreaming? Chapter 42-84. But why did the voice and the image seem so real? At that time, was Yu the one controlling your body? Just as he was wondering, he saw the child on the bed snatch the fruit knife from Yun Shirshir's hand. Under her shocked and terrified gaze, he raised the fruit knife in his hand high and stabbed it at Yun Shirshir at lightning speed. No! He screamed at the top of his lungs to stop it. He felt as if his soul had flown to Yun Shirshir. He opened his arms, wanting to block the knife for her. However, the fruit knife pierced through his body and went straight into Yun Shirshir's abdomen. Was it a dream? Gong Fan held his head in vexation. He only felt a faint pain in his temples, and his forehead was also in great pain, as if he had been punched by someone. He lifted the blanket and got out of bed. Just as he walked out of the ward, he saw a few people in the lobby. The reason why he described it as dark was because there were a few bodyguards standing in the lobby. They were tall and well-built, making the entire room seem much smaller. Who are you? Gong Fan was instantly alerted and glanced at them. When the bodyguards saw that he had woken up, they immediately sent someone to inform Mu Yaja outside the door. Mu Yaja and Xiao Chen walked in. When Gong Fan saw them, he didn't see Yun Shirshir and was instantly suspicious. Where's Mommy? Xiao Chen's expression was already unpleasant when he saw him. When he heard him mention Yun Shirshir, his expression became even more tense. You're not allowed to mention Mommy, Xiao Chen said coldly. You don't deserve to call her Mommy. Gong Fan was baffled by his cold demeanor, and his tone was somewhat frosty. Why are you yelling at me? He had never seen Xiao Chen so angry before, so he couldn't help but feel a little strange. Xiao Chen had never been so fierce to him. He had always spoken to him gently. However, at this moment, Gong Fan saw hatred on Xiao Chen's face. He actually felt a little unfamiliar. What's wrong? Gong Fan didn't know why Xiao Chen was glaring at him with such hatred. What exactly happened? Stop playing dumb with us. Why don't you just say it directly? What is your purpose? Gong Fan. He didn't know how to answer this question. Objective? Gong Fan could not help but laugh. What motive? What purpose do you think I have? I know you must want to replace Yu, right? Xiao Chen was on the verge of losing control. Mu Yaja immediately grabbed his shoulder and scolded, Don't talk nonsense. I'm not talking nonsense. It was all his fault. It's all his fault. Xiao Yichen's eyes were bloodshot. Ever since he appeared, this family has been turned upside down. Originally, this wouldn't have happened. It was all his fault. He wanted to destroy this family. No matter how calm Gong Fan was, when he heard this, he couldn't pretend to be shocked. His facial muscles tensed up slightly, and a look of disappointment flashed across his eyes. Gong Jie was guarding Yun Shishir's ward. Hua Jin was standing outside the door. When he heard the commotion in the room, he rushed in. However, when he saw the confrontation between the two parties, he was a little dazed. What's going on? Why are the two of them arguing? Chapter 42:85. He and I have never been brothers. Xiao Yichen was so angry that he started to speak without thinking. Yu has always been my brother. He's not my brother. He's just an intruder. Gong Fan's face turned even uglier when he heard this. His face turned red, but he stubbornly pursed his lips and didn't say a word. Even though he pretended to be calm, Xiao Yichen's cold and resolute words had already set off a storm in his heart. He and I have never been brothers. Yu has always been my brother. He's not my brother, he's just an intruder. An intruder. So in Xiao Yichen's heart, he was just an intruder? Then, was it the same in other people's hearts as well? Gong Fan's lips trembled slightly. When he thought of this possibility, it was as if his heart was being pierced. He lifted his head and looked at Mu Yaja and Hua Jin. His gaze swept across every inch of their faces, trying his best to catch a hint of what they were thinking. Was the concern in their eyes sincere? Or was it just an act? Or were they worried that he would harm Yu, so they were just acting, pretending to be concerned about him and treating him like family? Was all of this fake? When he thought of this, Gong Fan felt as if countless sharp swords were piercing his heart. Sad, Gong Fan lowered his head in a daze, revealing a desolate expression. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he thought that he was still acting. He angrily rushed in front of him and grabbed his shoulders tightly. In a low voice, he said, "Please return Yu to me, and don't let us see you again. Leave us and don't pester us anymore. What family? We don't have a family like you." It was obvious that in Xiao Yichen's heart, Gong Fan, who had personally stabbed Yun Shishir and even wanted to kill Yun Shishir, had committed an unforgivable crime. However, Gong Fan didn't move at all. He was like a puppet without a soul and didn't react at all. When Mu Yaja saw this, he couldn't bear it. He walked over and stopped Xiao Yichen. "Mu Yichen, calm down. Are you crazy?" He felt that this matter wasn't that simple, but he was an adult after all. He would consider everything from a different perspective. Even if Xiao Yichen saw it with his own eyes, from another perspective, Gong Fan didn't have any motive to do that. In other words, it wouldn't do him any good. Although he had his doubts, he didn't make a conclusion. "I'm not crazy." Little Yichen defended himself. "Daddy, haven't you realized it yet? You've always treated him as your own. But what happened when he came to our house? We tolerated him, accepted, but he wanted to hurt Yu's mommy. I can't forgive him, and I don't listen to him. I didn't." Gong Fan used the last bit of energy in his body to try and explain. "I really didn't. I don't want to listen to you. Get out of this body." This was a very harsh sentence. Xiao Yichen suddenly pushed him away. Gong Fan was caught off guard and was pushed to the ground. Mu Yaja pulled Xiao Yichen over and raised his hand to pinch his face. Chapter 42:86. Because of Mu Yaja's pull, Mu Yichen took half a step back. However, he was still glaring at Gong Fan like a ferocious beast waiting to pounce. He had completely lost control. Usually, no matter how big the danger was, no matter how scary the situation was, he was always everyone's mental support and could always maintain a calm appearance. However, he had only touched Yun Shishir. This was his bottom line and a reverse scale that he couldn't touch. He had seen with his own eyes how Gong Fan had used a fruit knife to stab Yun Shishir and even wanted to kill her. Those scenes were like a nightmare that kept replaying before his eyes. How could he forgive Gong Fan? From what he knew, it was Gong Fan's appearance that had turned this family upside down. The more he loved, the more he hated. It wasn't that he had never accepted Gong Fan. However, it was the person who had betrayed them so unwaveringly and deeply. This was the most unforgivable thing. Gong Fan fell to the ground, looking extremely pathetic. Hua Jin walked over and wanted to comfort him, but Gong Fan carefully broke free. He could no longer tell if the people around him were genuinely concerned about him or if they were just pretending. He felt that other than Yun Shishir, there was no one else who truly cared about him. However, Xiao Chen said that he had stabbed Yun Shishir with his own hands. However, he really didn't. Why didn't anyone believe his words? In the end, Gong Fan explained, I wouldn't do such a thing. If it wasn't you, who could it be? Don't tell me it was Yu. Xiao Chen definitely didn't believe that Yu had done this. To Yun Shishir was like his life. In fact, she was even more precious than his own life. How could he bear to hurt the person he loved the most? Gong Fan's gaze became hollow. Did no one believe his words? If he said no, then no. If he was the one who did it, he would definitely admit to it. But if he wasn't the one who did it, how could he admit to it? It wasn't an accusation that Yu was the one who did it, but why should he be blamed for something that he didn't do? Gong Fan was so sad that he wanted to cry. However, at that moment, his tears were accumulated in his heart. His heart seemed to have been stabbed by an invisible knife. The tears that flowed out were mixed with blood. It was impossible to tell them apart. When Hua Jin saw him like this, he felt very conflicted. Heartache, doubt, struggle, disbelief. Xiao Chen said that he saw Gong Fan stabbing Yun Shishir with a fruit knife with his own eyes. He even had the intention to kill her. It was a shocking scene. He didn't see it with his own eyes, so he couldn't say for sure what had happened. He couldn't accuse Gong Fan based on Xiao Chen's one-sided statement. He couldn't possibly doubt Xiao Chen's words just because of Gong Fan's one-sided statement. However, when he saw Gong Fan's sad and disappointed expression, Hua Jin felt an inexplicable pain in his heart. Get up. The floor is cold. He reached out to help him up, but Gong Fan stood up silently. However, his face was ashen and his body swayed slightly. Just as he was about to fall, he reached out to hold on to the door frame and barely steadied himself. He didn't want to say another word. Mommy. Where is she? Xiao Chen said that Yun Shishir was injured and he wanted to see her. Chapter 4287. When Xiao Chen heard this, he sneered. You don't deserve to see her, and you don't deserve to call her mommy. Gong Fan's face turned completely pale. He clenched his fists tightly. There was no doubt that Xiao Chen's words had completely infuriated him. I don't deserve to. Why don't I deserve to? I want to see her. Gong Fan wasn't sure if Yun Shishir thought the same of him or if she felt the same way. When he thought of this, Gong Fan couldn't wait to see Yun Shishir and explain himself. Even if the whole world misunderstood him and thought that he was the main culprit, it didn't matter. However, Yun Shishir was the only one he couldn't do that to. He didn't care what other people thought. He only cared about Yun Shishir's opinion of him. Gong Fan immediately walked out of the door. When Xiao Chen saw this, he immediately chased after him and grabbed his shoulders tightly. He asked coldly, You're not allowed to see mommy. Didn't you hear what I said? Gong Fan suddenly turned around and gave him a hard shove. Caught off guard, Xiao Chen was pushed to the ground with such force. It was such a sudden attack that Xiao Chen wasn't prepared for it. Furthermore, Gong Fan was quite strong. Especially when he was angry, his strength was multiplied. Gong Fan glared at him with bloodshot eyes. I'm warning you. I'm running out of patience. I want to see mommy right now. Xiao Chen quickly got up from the ground. Hua Jin wanted to persuade him, but Xiao Chen flung him away. You're not allowed to come over. This is between the two of us. As he said this, Xiao Chen casually took off his jacket and threw it aside. He rolled up his sleeves and said coldly, Unless you can defeat me, don't even think about walking out of this door. Hua Jin was completely stunned. He had never seen such a terrifying aura from Xiao Chen. It was as if there was a fire burning behind him. Gong Fan stared at him expressionlessly. The expression on his face was equally terrifying. The two of them stood facing each other. Their auras were astonishing, and they were evenly matched. The entire room fell into a state of depression because of the battle between the two of them. Xiao Chen was blocking the door. If she wanted to leave the room, she had to go through him. Gong Fan did not want to fight with him, but that did not mean that he was afraid of fighting with him. He walked straight to the door. He wanted to pass through the gap between Xiao Chen and the door, but Xiao Chen took a step to the left and blocked his path. In the next second, Gong Fan clenched his fist and punched him in the face. Xiao Chen raised his hand to catch it, but Gong Fan's punch was extremely fast. For a long time, Xiao Chen trained with Gong Fan. Growing up in such a family, they had to learn some fighting skills from a young age to protect themselves. In the past, Yu's health was not good. However, on Ashland Island, under Alice's meticulous care, his health improved greatly. Little Yi Chen was also reassured by his son's physical condition and began to teach him some kickboxing and fighting techniques. In this aspect, Gong Fan was not as talented as Xiao Chen. He was also not as strong as Xiao Chen. However, under Xiao Chen's guidance, he was able to achieve some results. However, compared to Xiao Chen, he was still a far cry. Mu Yi Chen threw him to the ground with one hand. Gong Fan fell to the ground, but he quickly got up and pounced on Xiao Chen again. Chapter 4288. The two of them were entangled in a fight. Hua Jin was trembling with fear as he watched from behind. Initially, he had hoped that Muyaja would step forward to mediate the fight. However, when he turned around and looked at the extremely calm man beside him, he was even more shocked. "Brother-in-law, are you just going to watch them fight like this?" Muyaja pursed his lips. "It's useless for me to mediate when the two of them are fighting. Why don't we just pull them apart?" "Don't worry, Xiao Chen won't hurt Xiao Chen. Even if Gong Fan uses all kinds of methods, he won't be able to hurt Xiao Chen." He was certain that nothing would happen if the two of them fought like this. However, Xiao Chen was doing this for two reasons. Firstly, he was venting his anger. Secondly, he was giving himself a reason to trust Gong Fan again. He must be telling himself that if Gong Fan defeated him, he would reluctantly trust him again. Hua Jin watched helplessly as Gong Fan clenched his fists and grabbed Xiao Chen's collar. Then, he punched him repeatedly in the face. Xiao Chen tilted his head left and right and nimbly dodged the attacks. Then, he retaliated with a punch that landed on the corner of Gong Fan's mouth. Gong Fan's teeth hit his lips and instantly started bleeding. However, Gong Fan was oblivious to it. He growled and attacked Xiao Chen from both sides again. He was so worried about Yun Shirshir that he was going crazy. How could he not be worried when Xiao Chen blocked him in such a domineering manner? As a result, he didn't know how to control his strength. Xiao Chen could defend against 10 of his attacks, but he might not be able to block all of them. Bam! Xiao Chen was careless and was quickly punched by Gong Fan. The strength of this punch was not to be underestimated. Xiao Chen's back hit the door frame and he almost lost his balance. Gong Fan took the opportunity to break through Xiao Chen's obstruction and swept past him. Xiao Chen had no intention of stopping her. She held her reddened cheekbones and stood up straight, but her eyes were obviously red. Hua Jin immediately walked over and asked worriedly, "Does it hurt? Is it important?" "It's fine." Xiao Chen pushed him away in annoyance. "Don't talk to me." As he spoke, he walked to the sofa and sat up. It was obvious that his anger had not subsided. Hua Jin's hands hung down helplessly, and he rubbed his forehead with a headache. Muyaja said, "You've already fought. Enough is enough. It's time to stop." With that, he left as well. Xiao Chen leaned against the sofa. His messy fringe fell over his eyes and covered his eyes, but it couldn't hide the viciousness in his eyes. Yun Shirshir, female, 29 years old. At the nurse's desk, Gong Fan provided his name and age and asked the nurse to help find out which ward Yun Shirshir was in. The patient is currently in Intensive Care Unit A029. However, you can't visit her in the ward yet. "Oh, thank you." Gong Fan turned around and walked into Ward A029. The nurse looked at Gong Fan's back view and couldn't help but mumble enviously, "This little guy is so cool." Gong Fan walked to the door of the ward and saw Gong Jie sitting on the long bench outside the ward. When he heard footsteps, he immediately looked up. When he saw that it was him, his expression changed slightly. "You're awake?" He was a little wary. Xiao Chen said that Yun Shishir was stabbed by Gong Fan and that he even wanted to kill her. Hence, he was wary. However, he didn't show any signs of being particularly wary. This was because he was confident that he could protect Yun Shishir well. When Gong Jie saw that the corner of Gong Fan's mouth was broken, he guessed that it was Xiao Chen's arm. He knew that the two little guys must have fought. Chapter 42-89. The window curtains were drawn and the nurse was changing the dressing inside. Gong Fan stood outside the window and couldn't see inside. Hence, he turned around and asked Gong Jie, "How's mommy?" It was as if he didn't know that Yun Shishir was so badly injured because of him. Gong Jie was suspicious. "Don't you remember what happened before?" When Gong Fan heard this, he was very disappointed. "You also suspect that I stabbed her?" Gong Jie was very calm and didn't overreact. "This is the truth. You stabbed mommy, didn't you? Xiao Chen and your daddy saw it with their own eyes." "I didn't," Gong Fan explained. Of course, he didn't expect Gong Jie to believe him. He didn't care what Gong Jie thought of him. He only cared about Yun Shishir. Gong Jie stood up and looked at him seriously. He frowned slightly. "What's your motive? What good does it do you to stab your mommy?" When Gong Fan heard this, he smiled indifferently. "Why do you only suspect me and not you?" Gong Jie was stunned. "It can only mean that you don't have the heart to accept me. All that talk about peaceful coexistence and treating me as your own is a joke. I don't believe that you will suspect you, but you will easily suspect me because my existence is a danger to you and you. Is that so?" Gong Jie's sharp questioning made Gong Fan's expression change endlessly. "At the end of the day, to you, an outsider will always be an outsider. Xiao Chen said that I'm an intruder. I'm sure you, Wuxia, and Hua Jin are all intruders, right? The reason why you treat me so carefully is because you're worried that if I lose control, I will harm you, right?" The more Gong Fan spoke, the more his voice trembled. Intruder. This word was too hurtful to him. Especially when Xiao Chen said this word through gritted teeth. His heart felt as if someone had cut it open with a knife. Until now, it was still in a bloody state. When Gong Jie heard this, he was speechless. "Why? You have nothing to say?" Gong Fan took a deep breath. "Forget it. I don't care what you think of me. I want to see mommy." Gong Jie said, "You can't enter the ward now." "Why?" "Now is the infection period. We can only do that after the infection period." When Gong Fan heard this, he did not say another word. He turned around and sat on the bench without saying a word. Wuxia soon after. Gong Jie was scrutinizing Gong Fan, but Gong Fan's. He walked over and said calmly, "You can't visit him yet. I know. You can come again later. I want to stay here and wait." Seeing how stubborn he was, Wuxia didn't say anything else. He looked at Gong Fan, who was staring at the window stubbornly. His hands were clenched into fists and placed on his knees. His shoulders were trembling slightly. His eyes turned red, but just as tears were about to flow out of his eyes, he forced them back. No one knew how much he was suffering and how uneasy he was. Even if in everyone's eyes, he was the culprit and everyone believed that he was the one who wanted to harm Yun Shishir, he didn't care. He didn't care.